Chapter 1933. The Frost Devils ran at an extremely fast speed. It was as if they had teleported within the ice and snow as they rapidly closed in on Chu Mu and the others. Following their roars, cold air surged forth and the northern wind whistled, causing snow to flutter. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 Frost Devils had closed in on Chu Mu and the others. The shocking cold air became even more intense. The hands of the Frost Devils looked very strange. They were different from the 5 fingers of a human. They were much thicker and had the appearance of sharp claws. They were frost claws. They quickly waved their frost claws. Biting cold air gathered between their claws and turned into claw marks that flickered with cold light. They tore through the air and clawed towards Chu Mu and the others. An attack of this level was enough to threaten an exceptional first refinement expert. "Chu Mu, be careful," Feng Wuhan said. Feng Wuhan said as he unsheathed his sword. It was as if a cool breeze was blowing around him, bringing the warmth of spring to this world of ice and snow. As he drew his sword light, the cool breeze blew past. Wherever it passed, the ice and snow seemed to melt. Under the cool breeze, the Frost Devil's frost claws were like ice and snow under the scorching sun, rapidly melting and disappearing. Among the 6 people from the Ancient Sword Alliance, Chu Mu's strength was defined as the limit of first refinement. That was the highest estimate of his strength. Therefore, more than 10 Frost Devils with the strength of first refinement already had the strength to threaten Chu Mu. The 6 of them were now allies. If conditions permitted, they would help Chu Mu. However, they would also leave some leeway for Chu Mu to display his own abilities. Other than Chu Mu, who was deemed to be at the limit of first refinement, the other 5 were at least at the middle stage of second refinement. Yes, Wang's son, who was in the state of assassination, did indeed have that kind of strength. Although there were more than 10 Frost Devils, their strength was only at the first refinement. They were not a match for the 6 of them at all. Feng Wuhan slashed out with his sword light. Wherever the sword light passed, 3 Frost Devils stopped in their tracks before disintegrating and disappearing. Xia Yongshuan's sword contained a desolate aura. That desolate aura seemed to be able to infect the surrounding environment. Even the ice and snow seemed to have an additional desolate aura. 3 frigid ice devils had died under his sword. Wang's son's figure flashed and killed 2 Frost Devils in a row. He dismembered them and cut them into countless pieces. Lei Ba's hands flickered with lightning as they instantly blasted out, blasting the 2 Frost Devils into pieces. As for Kong Lu, he could be said to be the most familiar with the Frost Devils. Therefore, it was easier for him to attack. Under his spatial blade, the 3 Frost Devils were cut into countless pieces. The last Frost Devil man died under Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu did not use his full strength. That was because the strength of a mere Frost Devil man was only equivalent to a peak first refinement expert. To Chu Mu, such an Ice Devil man didn't pose any threat. However, in the eyes of others, it was different. They had personally seen Chu Mu easily kill an Ice Devil man with the strength of a peak first refinement initial stage. This further proved Chu Mu's strength, causing them to be even more at ease. When the dozen or so Frost Devils died, they directly melted and disappeared, leaving nothing behind. The probability of frigid jade essence appearing in the bodies of Frost Devils is very low. It's about 100 to 1. Kong Lu said. More than 10 years ago, he had killed thousands of Frost Devils and only managed to obtain dozens of frigid jade essences. The probability of 100 to 1 was not exaggerated at all. However, if it's a Frost Devil general, then every one of them would have frigid jade essence in their bodies. Frost Devil general? Is it an existence of a higher level than the Frost Devils? Feng Wuhan asked. That's right. The strength of a Frost Devil man is at the first refinement. The strongest will not reach the second refinement. As for the Frost Devil general, the weakest will be at the early second refinement and the strongest will be at the peak second refinement. Kong Lu said, more than 10 years ago, I planned to enter the depths of the secret realm. Unfortunately, I was unlucky and encountered a middle-second refinement Frost Devil General. At that time, I was only at the early second refinement and could not defeat it. I could only rely on my life-saving ability to retreat. However, it's different now. Perhaps we can kill the Frost Devil General and enter the Frost Palace in the depths of the secret realm. What are you waiting for? Leba said. He clenched his fists and blazing electric arcs jumped around, as if lightning was flashing and thunder was rumbling. Kong Lu had been here before, so he led the way. Under the heavenly oath, everyone was at ease. They continued to move forward. As they went deeper, the cold air became heavier and the Frost Devil General that appeared became stronger. Middle first refinement. Peak first refinement. High first refinement. Peak first refinement. Peak first refinement. Peak first refinement. Peak first refinement. After that, it was the peak first refinement. However, whether it was the middle first refinement or the peak first refinement, they were not much of a threat to the people of the ancient Sword Alliance. Chu Mu did not even need to make a move. The 5 of them killed the Frost Devils one by one. In this secret realm, the Frost Devils had the advantage of the environment, which increased their survival ability. However, the difference between the second refinement and the first refinement was very obvious. No matter how great the Frost Devil's advantage was, it was useless in the face of absolute power. Death was their only ending. As the group continued to kill, they began to harvest the Frost Chalcedony. The shapes of the frigid jade essence were all different. Some were irregular circles, some were prismatic, some were cylindrical, and so on. Furthermore, the frigid jade essences produced by frigid demons of different strengths were not very different in size. However, the power contained within was different. The Frost Chalcedony was not only suitable for cultivators of frost attribute cultivation techniques, it was also suitable for other cultivators. Absorbing and refining it could clearly purify one's own power and better temper one's laws. It could be said that it was an extremely important cultivation resource. However, now was not the time to refine the Frost Chalcedony. The group first took it and kept it. They would distribute it after they left. The coldness grew heavier and heavier, and it began to affect the flow of everyone's blood to a certain extent. They had passed through the area of the Frost Devils and entered the area of the Frost Demon General. The first Frost Demon General appeared before everyone's eyes. The Frost Demon General's body was taller than the Frost Devil's. It was 2.5 meters tall and the color of its body was deeper. Its pair of eyes were like sapphires, cold and emotionless, indifferent to the world. A powerful cold aura emanated from the Frost Devil General's body, sweeping in all directions. When it saw Chu Mu and the others, the Frost Devil General let out a roar and quickly moved over. Under its feet, a circle of light blue ripples quickly spread out. The ripples covered 100-meter radius, and the ice and snow ground froze again on top of its original foundation. Frost Demonic Ring. This was the innate ability of the Frost Demon General. It could produce a shocking chill that was several times stronger than the chill in the environment. It directly affected the flow of everyone's blood and qi, and affected the flexibility of their bodies, causing them to be unable to use their full strength. Brother Chu Mu, you stay behind us. Lei Ba's body flashed, and he turned into a bolt of lightning that rapidly blasted towards the Frost Demon General. Unknowingly, a pair of purple fists had appeared in Lei Ba's hands. There were countless arcs of lightning dancing on the fist. In an instant, Lei Ba rapidly closed in on the Frost Demon General and entered the range of the Frost Demonic Ring. Frost rapidly spread out from his body, and his speed dropped significantly. With a low roar, a terrifying power burst out. Lightning flowed around his body, dispersing the frost. His speed increased again, and he closed in on the Frost Demon General. Both of his fists struck out continuously, and it was as if lightning had broken through the sky, chasing after the Frost Demon General's body. With 2 bangs, the Frost Demon General's body trembled, and it was forced to retreat. 2 holes were formed on its body, and lightning flowed around. However, under the Frost demonic ring, a large amount of chill was absorbed and injected into the Frost Demon General's body, causing the 2 holes on its body to heal rapidly. Just as Kong Lu had said, it was impossible to kill the Frost Demon General without destroying it directly. It could be said that this Frost Demon General, who was only at the initial second refining, was very difficult to deal with. Its survivability was above that of a middle second refining expert, and was comparable to a peak middle second refining expert. In addition, it had the ability to recover rapidly, which made it even more difficult to deal with. Lei Ba's power burst out once again, and he performed a powerful killing move. Lightning was like a prison, and a terrifying power covered the Frost Demon General's body. It flowed up and down and wantonly destroyed everything. Under this attack, the Frost Demon General's body was torn to pieces, and it was finally killed. After killing the initial second refining Frost Demon General, Lei Ba seemed to have fought a great battle, and had used up 20% of his strength. The road ahead will not be easy, Lei Ba said with a grave expression. Lei Ba's expression was grave as he spoke. He held a piece of cold ice jade essence in his hand. It was larger than the cold ice demon man's, and the energy contained within it was several times more majestic. The others also nodded their heads. Although the battle between Lei Ba and the icy demon general had ended in a very short period of time, with their eyesight, they were able to see many things. Therefore, they understood that it would be very difficult to advance on the path to the icy palace. Chu Mu, why don't you stay here first? Feng Wuhan said. Soon after, he shook his head. It's not good to stay here either. We might encounter the Frost Demon Man or the Frost Demon General at any time. It's better for you to advance with us. If things don't work out, our goal will be to obtain the Frost Jade Essence, Kong Lu said. Even though entering the Frost Palace was extremely attractive to them, everything had to be based on the actual situation. Maybe we'll be lucky and enter the Frost Palace, Chu Mu said with a smile. Then we'll count on your auspicious words, the others said with a smile. In order to maintain the speed of their advance, whenever they encountered the Frost Demon General, at least 2 people would attack and try to kill it as quickly as possible to obtain the Frigid Chalcedony. As long as they obtained the Frigid Chalcedony, the Frost Demon General would have no hope of recovery. Otherwise, even if it was shattered, the Frigid Chalcedony would still be there. As time passed, it would absorb the cold air and eventually recover. Gradually, the outline of a palace appeared in everyone's sight. Chapter 1934. The outline of the Ice Palace was right in front of everyone's eyes. It was as if it was right in front of them. Everyone's eyes lit up with hope and anticipation. They didn't feel any pressure when they passed through the Frost Devil Man's area, but when they entered the Frost Devil General's area, the pressure kept increasing. From the initial Frost Devil General at the beginning to the peak of the Frost Devil General at the beginning, to the middle of the second refinement, and then to the peak of the middle of the second refinement. And now, they had just killed a Frost Devil General at the high of the second refinement. In terms of absolute strength, the high second refinement Frost Demon General was actually not that strong, and was at the normal level. However, the might of its Frost Demon Ring was astonishing. Even experts like Wang Sun and Lei Ba would be clearly affected by it, and had to maintain a state of full power in order to resist it. Airflow was also clearly affected, but he seemed to have a treasure on him that could resist the cold. Therefore, he had an easier time than Lei Ba and Wang Sunday. As for Xia Yongxuan and Feng Wuhan, they were the strongest, and had an easier time resisting it. However, the advanced second refining Frost Demon General's survivability was even more shocking. Its body was incomparably tough and difficult to destroy. As long as it wasn't completely destroyed, it could quickly recover. Killing the advanced second refining Frost Demon General was the result of everyone working together except for Chu Mu. In a one-on-one situation, Even Feng Wuhan couldn't destroy it in a short period of time. Even though the silhouette of the Ice Palace was already in everyone's eyes, and even though everyone's hearts were filled with anticipation, they were also very clear that the Ice Demon Generals they would encounter in the following journey might be even stronger. An advanced second refinement Frost Demon General was already very troublesome for them. If it was a peak second refinement Frost Demon General, it would be even more difficult to deal with. As for a peak second refinement Frost Demon General, or even an extreme second refinement Frost Demon General. Thinking of this, everyone's hearts couldn't help but feel heavy. It was a heavy feeling of worry. The Ice Palace was clearly right in front of them, but they couldn't enter because they weren't strong enough. That sort of feeling was extremely unbearable. After regaining their strength, everyone moved forward again. Chumu, because he was the weakest, walked at the back. As everyone expected, a peak second refinement Frost Demon General appeared before everyone's eyes. Moreover, it rapidly rushed over and roared. A frightening chilliness spread out and surged forward. Flying snow drifted down and sprinkled down. It was endless and endless, turning the place into a world of snow. The ice claws tore through the sky, and the shadows of the claws covered the sky. Countless cold air swept up and attacked everyone from all directions. Breeze and moon soared. Feng Wuhan's body moved, and everyone felt as if the snowy sky had changed. Night fell, and a bright moon hung in the sky. A cool breeze blew, and the bright moon hung high in the sky. These two completely different concepts fused together under his sword, and he instantly attacked. It was as if there was not the slightest bit of smoke or fire. Boundless sorrow. Xia Yongshuan's sword carried a sense of sorrow. Any life with some intelligence would be affected by it. This Frost Demon General obviously had a certain level of intelligence, and it was no exception. However, the Frost Demon General's intelligence wasn't high, and it wasn't affected that much. It only paused for a moment, but this pause allowed everyone to find an opportunity. Explosive thunder break. Leiba opened his hands and drew a line. Countless bolts of lightning gathered and condensed into an incomparably terrifying lightning spear. It seemed as if it could shatter the heavens, and it blasted towards the Frost Demon General. Void slash. Kong Lu raised one hand, and a silver light flickered on the edge of his palm. Silently, the space under his palm was torn apart, and it quickly spread out towards the Frost Demon General. Wang Sun's figure flickered, and in a flash, he appeared behind the Frost Demon General, and the short sword in his hand slashed out rapidly. The five of them didn't hold back at all. The Frost Demon General couldn't dodge, and it immediately suffered the fiercest attack. Even a peak second refinement expert wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack. The body of the great Ice Demon General started to shatter. However, there was still a piece of frigid ice chalcedony that didn't completely shatter. A suction force came from the piece of frigid ice chalcedony, and a huge amount of frigid ice chalcedony appeared. Everyone had just unleashed their strongest moves. When they caught sight of this, their faces changed. That recovery speed was way too fast. It was as though the Frost Demon General would be able to recover more than half of its strength in just a single breath, and it would be able to recover fully in just 2 breaths. Once 1 breath of time passed, the Frost Demon General would be able to fight again. Moreover, they had just used their strongest moves, and it would be difficult for them to use it a second time. In the blink of an eye, a sword light seemed to have come from the heavens, and it instantly arrived. It seemed as if it had transcended time and space, and it directly struck the piece of the frigid ice chalcedony. It was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Where the tip of the sword landed, cracks immediately spread out, and with a cracking sound, it completely shattered. The part that had just recovered also shattered, and a piece of the frigid ice chalcedony fell to the ground. Everyone couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. With a glance, they saw that it was actually Chu Mu who had attacked. Good! Leiba laughed. What a wonderful sword! With the same cultivation, I don't know if I can block such a sword. Feng Wuhan also laughed. That sword wasn't very strong, and it was only at the first refinement. However, the timing was unique, and it was extremely shocking. We can't just watch from the side. Chumu laughed, and with a swing of his sword, the frigid ice chalcedony fell into Kong Lu's hand. Currently, all the frigid ice chalcedony belonged to Kong Lu. After all, he was the one who had contributed to the secret realm. Of course, this was only temporary. Once they left, it would be time to distribute the frigid ice chalcedony. Everyone, let's recover first. Using their ultimate move had consumed a portion of their energy. Although it was only a small portion, they might encounter even more terrifying frigid ice demon generals later. Hence, it was necessary for them to recover to their peak. What was strange was that they didn't encounter any frigid ice demon generals after that. They continued forward and arrived at the entrance of the ice palace. The ice palace seemed to be made of solid ice. It was a deep blue color and emitted a biting cold that froze everything in its surroundings. That kind of cold actually made everyone feel cold all over. The circulation of their blood and qi was very obviously affected. They had to constantly maintain the circulation of their yuan power to resist the cold that was constantly invading them. The ice palace was very big, and the entrance was tightly shut. There were countless patterns on the entrance, and those patterns formed the image of a frigid ice demon general. While everyone was sizing up the ice palace, the patterns on the door suddenly lit up. Soon after, countless berserk cold qi violently surged from all directions and was absorbed by the door. The light from the patterns became increasingly intense, illuminating everyone's eyes and causing them to feel uncomfortable. When the light dissipated, a frigid ice demon general appeared before everyone's eyes. It was obviously different from the other frigid ice demon generals. This frigid ice demon general was 3 meters tall, and it wore a horned helmet on its head. Its body was covered in deep blue armor, and it was fully armed. It held a 3-meter-long frigid ice halberd in its hand. In the depths of its deep blue eyes, there was a scarlet light flickering. Looking at it made one's heart tremble. This was an extremely terrifying frigid ice demon general. The aura emitted from its body let everyone know that this was a frigid ice demon general that had reached the peak of the second refinement. The peak of the advanced second refinement was already very difficult for them to deal with. Now, it had directly surpassed the peak of the second refinement, reached the peak of the second refinement, and even had armor and a weapon. This frigid ice demon general's strength was absolutely terrifying. Defeat me, and you can enter the ice palace, the frigid ice demon general said, its voice incomparably cold. Everyone was shocked. A frigid ice demon general that could speak? One had to know that there were dozens of frigid ice demon generals that had died under their hands. Almost 100 of them, but this was the first time they had encountered a frigid ice demon general that could speak. It seems like it's a test. A test to determine whether or not we can enter the ice palace. A frigid ice demon general that has reached the peak of the second refinement is extremely difficult to deal with. We have to fight with our lives on the line. After the frigid ice demon general finished speaking, its qi fluctuated. Immediately, a ripple spread out from its feet. It was the frigid ice demon ring. In an instant, it spread out to a radius of 1,000 meters, freezing everything. In the instant that the frigid ice demon ring spread out, everyone reacted quickly and retreated at full speed. Feng Wuhen's body was like a gust of wind as he retreated in the blink of an eye. Xia Yong-sun retreated a step. Kong Lu's body flickered as he shuttled through the cracks in the air. Lei Ba transformed into a bolt of lightning. Wang's sun seemed to have merged into his shadow. As for Chu Mu, he had retreated even earlier than them. What a terrifying frigid ice qi! Even though everyone had retreated at full speed, they could still feel the terrifying frigid ice qi. A terrifying explosion sounded out. In front of them, an incomparably shocking blue light flashed. It was the frigid ice demon general's halberd. In a flash, it tore through the air and transformed into a terrifying light that shot towards the crowd. There were a total of 6 lights. Each of them contained an incomparably terrifying power. The frigid ice demon general's attack was too fast and too sudden. Everyone was shocked. They immediately used their movement techniques and dodged. The 6 lights tore through the ground. The ice on the ground was forcibly torn apart. The ground was 1,000 meters long. It was as if the ground had been torn apart. It was extremely terrifying. If they were hit by that attack, even if they didn't die, they would be seriously injured. The frigid ice demon general didn't stop. It attacked again. The 3-meter-long halberd in its hand spun and broke through the air again. Spear shadows tore through the air and swept through the world of ice and snow. It was like a violent flood that destroyed everything. The frigid ice demon general's strength was too tyrannical. It had already surpassed Feng Wuhen's strength. He couldn't face it head-on. Everyone could only use their movement techniques and do their best to dodge and find an opportunity to counterattack. Chapter 1935. Countless dark blue spear lights pierced through the air, blasting in all directions and tearing the earth apart. The ice demon general's shocking strength was displayed without a doubt. No one could get close to it. The ice demonic ring with a radius of 1,000 meters, in addition to the violent attacks of the spear and halberd, caused cold air to surge from all directions in the world of ice and snow. They turned into ice dragons and entered the ice demonic general's body, replenishing its energy. It could be said that in this mystic realm and in this environment, the frost demon general possessed limitless power. It could unleash all of its attacks to its heart's content. Every attack was at least at the peak of the second refinement, or even at the peak of the second refinement. The power was terrifying, and the attack was endless. Among the group, the strongest was Feng Wuhen, who was at the peak of the second refinement, but he could not be compared to the ice demon general. They could only keep dodging, trying to find an opportunity. Unfortunately, the chances were slim. They could not get close to the ice demon general. Shadowless breeze. Feng Wuhen immediately used a secret technique. Shadowless breeze was the only secret technique that Feng Wuhen knew. It could not directly increase his strength, but it could make his body more ethereal. In an instant, it was as if he could turn into a breeze, passing through all the attacks. Feng Wuhen used a secret technique, and Xia Yongxuan also used a secret technique. A sense of sadness seemed to emerge from the depths of his heart. From the roots of his hair, it spread like snow, quickly turning white. His aura was cold and desolate, and his gray eyes revealed a heart-palpitating sadness. In the sky, countless lightning bolts struck down, converging into one, directly hitting Lei Ba's body. Lei Ba suddenly trembled and let out a shocking roar. Countless lightning bolts flashed, and electric arcs jumped. Lightning bolts wandered around his body, and finally condensed into an armor of lightning. This was the secret technique that Lei Ba had mastered. He used the power of lightning to condense an armor of lightning to protect himself. Once he was attacked, he could even counterattack. Moreover, it made his power of lightning stronger, increasing his strength by 7 to 8 times. Void transformation, shatter. Silver light flashed in Kong Lu's eyes. The power of space around him was chaotic and violent. With a wave of his hands, he crossed more than 1,000 meters. The space behind the frost demon general instantly cracked open and spread rapidly, affecting the frost demon general's body. Kong Lu's secret technique was different from other people's. It didn't increase one's strength, nor did it increase one's speed. Instead, it was a direct, offensive secret technique. It only had a momentary power, but once it was unleashed, it was extremely terrifying. Among the secret techniques, offensive secret techniques were extremely rare. They were even more precious than secret techniques that could increase one's strength. The space shattered, covering the entire body of the Frost Demon General. The horrifying power continued to cut the body of the Frost Demon General, leaving scars on its body. Void Flow used his full strength for this secret technique. He did not hold back at all. With his strength as an intermediate second refinement, it was enough to kill an advanced second refinement and threaten a peak second refinement. However, the Frost Demon General's strength was at the peak of the second refinement. When his power erupted and he waved his halberd, he actually managed to forcibly shatter the void. Kong Lu's expression changed, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. At the same time, Wind Without Trace, who had used Shadowless Breeze, ignored the Frost Demon General's Frost Demon Ring and Frost Halberd. He appeared in front of the Frost Demon General. The spiritual sword in his hand turned into an infinite number of densely packed swords that condensed into a gust of wind that blew forward. That gust of wind was formed by the combination of countless sword chi and sword radiance. When it blew on the Frost Demon General's body, it immediately tore apart its armor. This sword was Wind Without Trace's most powerful attack. Even someone at the peak of the second refinement would be threatened by it. However, the Frost Demon General was too powerful. It was even more shocking than an ordinary peak of the second refinement. This was because once it was injured, as long as it wasn't a fatal injury, it could instantly absorb the cold air to recover. Therefore, the damage caused by Wind Without Trace's full-strength attack was instantly healed. As the Frost Halberd waved, a horrifying power swept out in all directions. Countless cold air surged and nearly froze Wind Without Trace. The Shadowless Breeze secret technique was indeed a shocking secret technique that could allow one to avoid many attacks. However, this kind of cold air attack happened to be its nemesis. Xia Yongxuan attacked with all his might, and the heavens and earth grieved. However, he still couldn't kill the Frost Demon General. He couldn't even injure it. The difference in strength was too great. Wang Sun was only at the beginning of the second refinement. Using the secret technique only allowed him to hide even more. It was clearly very powerless against an existence like the Frost Demon General. Lei Ba turned into lightning and tore through the sky, shattering the ice. It was like a sudden clap of thunder that fell from the sky. It struck the Frost Demon General, but it was blocked by the Frost Halberd in the Frost Demon General's hand. With a bang, Lei Ba was sent flying. The thunder armor on his body instantly shattered. The power of that attack had exceeded the thunder armor's endurance. It was also because the thunder armor had blocked the Frost Demon General's attack that Lei Ba wasn't killed. As his body flew out, the Frost Demon General followed up with another attack. A terrifying icy blue spear radiance charged towards Lei Ba as if it could shatter the vacuum. Dodge! Be careful! Feng Wuhan, Kong Lu and the others' faces changed drastically. Lei Ba was one of them. He was an ally of the Ancient Sword Alliance, and could be considered as their friend. He was someone who wanted to fight against the Imperial Court. No matter what his identity was, he couldn't die here. However, the Frost Demon General's strength was too tyrannical. They couldn't help and save Lei Ba at all. Wang Sun's figure flashed as he quickly approached Lei Ba. He hadn't made a move until now. Now, it was time for him to use it. However, the Ice Devil General seemed to have sensed Wang Sun's actions. Its eyes flickered with a sharp light as it shot out two terrifying icy blue rays. Everywhere it passed, the void froze. Wang Sun, who was locked onto, also felt his body tremble. The coldness invaded his entire body, causing his blood to freeze. His movements paused in an instant, as though his entire person was about to be frozen solid. What was worse was that Wang Sun had just appeared beside Lei Ba. Not only did he fail to save Lei Ba, he even trapped himself. Under the Frost Demon General's attack, the two of them would instantly be smashed into pieces. It's over. Lei Ba was extremely unwilling, but there was nothing he could do. Not only did that attack shatter his thunder armor, the terrifying power also caused him to temporarily lose all resistance. The power in his body didn't listen to his orders and couldn't be mobilized. Don't worry. An indifferent voice entered the ears of Lei Ba and Wang Sun, who were in despair. That voice sounded extremely familiar. Moreover, it was one of the voices that they had been hearing recently. However, they didn't dare to believe it. A burning blood-red sword light broke through the void and descended, as if it had crossed thousands of miles. The blood-red sword gleam slashed at the icy blue spear gleam. When they collided, an incomparably terrifying power erupted. In an instant it exploded and spread out in all directions. The terrifying aftershock could easily kill a second refinement powerhouse. Lei Ba and Wang Sun only felt a force pushing their bodies. In an instant they were pushed to the left and right. Coincidentally, they avoided all the impact and landed far away. It's Chu Mu. It's actually him. Since when did this guy have such strength? Feng Wuhan, Xia Yongxuan, and Kong Lu were extremely shocked. Their eyes widened. Ever since they were young, nothing had surprised them as much as this. In their opinion, Chu Mu's strength was at most at the peak of the first refinement. That was already an extremely high level. However, it seemed like that wasn't the case. The peak of the first refinement had been underestimated. They had greatly underestimated Chu Mu. Lei Ba and Wang Sun, who had landed on the ground, were also dumbfounded. They stared foolishly at the figure that was fighting with the Frost Demon General. His body was burning with blood-red flames. With a terrifying power fluctuation, he held a sword in each hand and continuously attacked. His attacks were incomparably violent. He actually managed to suppress the ferocious Frost Demon General. The five of them had all turned into wooden sculptures. Their minds were in a mess and they were completely unable to react. They originally thought that he was the weakest among the six of them. However, he had suddenly become the strongest. This change was too sudden, and it was difficult for them to accept it. While they were fighting with the Frost Demon General, Chu Mu had already seen the situation clearly. He quickly retreated and used the Divine Wilderness Unity mystic technique. As he had retreated far away, and everyone's attention was focused on the Frost Demon General, no one paid attention to what Chu Mu was doing. After using the Divine Wilderness Unity mystic technique, power filled his entire body. Chu Mu then used the Blood Prison Heaven Burning mystic technique, burning 30% of his blood essence in exchange for an 8-fold increase in strength. With 2 swords in hand, his strength multiplied. Under the sword domain transformation, it increased by 7 times. His strength soared, reaching the peak of the advanced second refinement. He was 1 step away from the peak of the second refinement. However, such strength was still not enough to fight against the Frost Demon General. Therefore, Chu Mu used the Sword God's Descent mystic technique. The second level of the Sword God's Descent mystic technique was a 100-fold increase. Chu Mu's strength had exceeded the limit of the second refinement. It was equivalent to having half a step into the third refinement. In terms of absolute strength, Chu Mu had already surpassed the Frost Demon General. However, the Frost Demon General still had the geographical advantage. Powerful strength and exquisite swordsmanship gave Chu Mu astonishing strength. No matter how powerful the Frost Demon General was, it was still suppressed. Chu Mu's dual sword attacks were endless. Each strike penetrated the Frost Demon General's ice spear and halberd, slashing at its body and tearing apart its armor. The Frost Demon General's combat techniques were unrestrained. Compared to Chu Mu's, it could only be described as crude. After a long while, everyone gradually reacted. Their eyes were filled with resentment as they stared at Chu Mu's figure like a resentful wife in her boudoir. This fellow is actually so powerful. Why didn't he say anything? Wang Sun said. He felt ashamed when he thought of how he had tried to probe Chu Mu. He's too good at hiding, Feng Wuhan muttered. The others also had their own thoughts. Chapter 1936. Feng Wuhan, Xia Yongxuan, Kong Lu, Lei Ba, and Wang Sun were all reduced to spectators. Chu Mu unleashed all of his strength and displayed his sword techniques to his heart's content. His exquisite and peerless sword techniques caused Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan to be incomparably shocked. The two of them were sword cultivators, so their experience was much deeper than the other three. I've underestimated him. Feng Wuhan smiled bitterly and shook his head. In front of Chu Mu, all his advantages were gone. In terms of strength, he was only at the peak of the second refinement, while Chu Mu was at least at the peak of the second refinement. In terms of swordsmanship, Chu Mu was even better than him. His swordsmanship has improved greatly compared to the past. Kong Lu and Lei Ba were also very emotional. In the past, they had fought with Chu Mu. It was almost pure battle techniques, so they knew how Chu Mu's swordsmanship was decades ago. Unexpectedly, in just 33 years, not only had his strength improved at an unprecedented speed, but his swordsmanship had also improved greatly. He was simply an inhuman existence. At this time, the outside world was searching for Chu Mu's whereabouts. The 4 imperial guards of the imperial court had also chased to the Tianshan domain. They seemed to have a special ability to track Chu Mu's whereabouts. This ice demon general was different from the other ice demon generals. It had intelligence that was almost comparable to a human's. Moreover, it had an absolute calmness that humans did not have. In the face of Chu Mu's continuous attacks, the ice demon general continued to resist without the slightest anger. It was very clear where its advantage was. In this place, its power was endless. As long as it did not die, it would quickly recover. Therefore, as long as it had enough time, when this human's power was mostly exhausted and he could no longer maintain this kind of attack, it would be the time for it to counterattack. The Ice Demon General did not have any distinction between ordinary moves or ultimate move. Every move it made was an ordinary move, but every move it made was an ultimate move. It fully displayed its power. Therefore, in such an environment, even if the opponent was stronger than it, as long as it was not an absolute suppression, it would be the final winner. With Chu Mu's intelligence, how could he not understand this? Chu Mu understood. In the secret realm, the advantage of this Frost Demon General is too obvious. If we can't kill it, it will recover very quickly. With my current strength, I can be considered half a step to the third refinement. If I use the Great Heavenly Might Sword style, its power might barely reach the third refinement level. It should be enough to kill this Frost Demon General. However, using the Great Heavenly Might Sword style requires some time. If I give the Frost Demon General some time, it will be disadvantageous to me. Chu Mu understood this very well. Thus, his current attack was not useless. Instead, he was preparing to unleash a killing blow. One sword strike after another, in a continuous stream. The cloud-piercing sword style, the Dao-cutting sword style, and the Zhen Tian sword style alternated. With absolute power, Chu Mu did not need to defend or dodge at all. He only needed to attack, and suppress the Frost Demon General. The Heart Sword was like a single strike. Every strike would definitely hit the Frost Devil General's body. Heaven and Earth Cross Slash. The resplendent Heaven and Earth Cross sword light directly imprinted on the Frost Demon General's chest. The frost armor on its body endured Chu Mu's repeated attacks, and cracks continuously appeared. Although it absorbed the cold air to recover, the speed of recovery could not keep up with the speed of Chu Mu's destruction. Under the Heaven and Earth Cross Slash, the frost armor was directly shattered. This is the chance. Chu Mu's eyes shone brightly, as if a divine sword had been unsheathed. Dao-cutting sword style. The two swords slashed the Frost Demon General's arms, which were holding the frost spear and halberd. Then, the two swords violently slashed the other arm. Your time has come. Great Heavenly Might Sword style. Shattering the ice armor and chopping off his arms, even if he had the advantage of the environment and could quickly recover, he still needed a bit of time. Yet, this bit of time was exactly what Chu Mu needed. The sword was raised high. The sky of the secret realm was unable to stop the descent of the heavenly lightning. Countless lightning flashes condensed into an incomparably terrifying thunderbolt that instantly struck down. The thunderbolt struck Chu Mu's raised sword. Chu Mu's body seemed to tremble, and an indescribable power spread out. Lei Ba's eyes widened. He was a lightning cultivator, and the power of lightning in his body was even more tyrannical than experts of the same level who had comprehended the law of lightning. But at this moment, when he felt the thunderbolt from the sky, he was incomparably shocked. The power of lightning was completely above his. Chu Mu was a sword cultivator, not a lightning cultivator. How could he endure this? How could he endure this? The sword with all his strength, the most tyrannical sword, was slashed down. At the same time, the Frost Demon General's arms recovered, and the Frost Spear and Halberd were once again in his hands. The frost armor on his body was also half-formed. Slash! A loud roar resounded, and the sword slashed down. The indescribable sword light tore the sky apart. The sword light traversed the past and the present, rampaging through the heavens and the earth. Feng Wuhan and the others were all dumbfounded. They couldn't find any words to describe Chu Mu's sword. The terrifying aura let them know that this was a sword that had surpassed the second refinement. This sword already had the power of the third refinement. Just when they thought that they had seen through Chu Mu once again displayed a strength that shocked them. A sword that had the power of the third refinement. It was an unimaginable sword. This sword directly shattered the heavens and the earth. The Frost Demon General was simply unable to resist. Under the incomparably terrifying sword light, its body began to crumble inch by inch. Even when countless amounts of frost chi rushed over, it was unable to save the Frost Demon General. With a bang, the tyrannical Frost Demon General, in front of everyone's eyes, exploded under Chu Mu's sword. The sword light disappeared, and Chu Mu quickly flicked the Frost Chalcedony into his hand. Everyone stared blankly at Chu Mu. For a moment, their minds were frozen. After a long time, they finally reacted. "You tricked us." Feng Wuhan smiled bitterly. "How is this the limit of the first refinement? It clearly has the power of the third refinement." "You didn't ask." Chu Mu shrugged his shoulders and said innocently. Such an expression made everyone want to surround him and beat him up. At that moment, an obscure but loud sound rang out. The tightly shut doors of the Ice Palace opened. "The Ice Palace is open. Let's go in." Everyone was instantly overjoyed. They quickly moved and appeared in front of the Ice Palace's doors and entered. The palace was 300 meters tall and a few thousand meters wide. It looked extremely huge. Around the palace, there were countless murals. There were frost demons, Frost Demon General, and even something more terrifying than the Frost Demon General. Those murals were lifelike, as if they could come to life at any time. Of course, no one hoped that the Frost Demons, Frost Demon General, or something even more terrifying would come to life. They quickly scanned the palace, and in the end, their gazes focused on the throne at the center of the palace. That throne was made of ice, but it didn't emit any coldness. However, there was nothing on the ice throne at all. "Is there no treasure? Everyone, let's look." The six of them quickly spread out and searched everywhere. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything. They also didn't find the so-called secret door. Some strong cultivators only leave behind their own inheritances. If that's the case, then the inheritance should be on the throne. Xia Yongshuan said. Looking at this secret territory and the throne, the person who left behind the inheritance should be an ice elemental cultivator. It's useless to me. Feng Wuhan shook his head. He was a wind elemental cultivator, and he would continue walking down this path. It's useless to me as well. Xia Yongshuan, Lei Ba, and Wang Sun shook their heads. There was nothing they could do. None of them were ice elemental cultivators. I'm also not an ice elemental cultivator, Chu Mu said. If others heard this, they would probably cry until they fainted in the toilet. Here, they didn't seem to be willing to accept an opportunity that others couldn't obtain. After all, they were very clear about their own path. They couldn't change their cultivation path, nor could they divert their attention to other paths. The Frost Demon General was killed by Chu Mu. The door to the palace can be considered opened by him. Chu Mu, go and accept the inheritance. Feng Wuhan smiled. Even if you don't cultivate ice elemental cultivation, you might still be able to obtain the treasures left behind by the strong cultivator. There might be treasures that can increase our strength. Everyone expressed their agreement, and Chu Mu could only accept it. He strode towards the throne. Suddenly, a light flashed on the throne, and an illusory figure condensed, sitting on the throne. That illusory figure looked very blurry, but his eyes were ice blue. Wherever his gaze landed, everyone's body froze as if they were frozen. An unconcealable chill rose in their hearts. I'm a consciousness left behind by the Frost Saint Sovereign. I left my inheritance here. You guys are fated to be able to enter this place. The illusory figure with ice-blue eyes suddenly spoke. His voice carried a shocking chill, as if it had pierced through time and space. There was a special rhythm to his voice. Frost Saint Sovereign! A Saint Sovereign expert! Everyone exclaimed. Frost Saint Sovereign, this secret realm is actually left behind by a Saint Sovereign. Chu Mu was also shocked. Saint Sovereign? No, a Saint Sovereign is not a Saint Sovereign. Feng Wuhan glanced at Chu Mu and said, That's right. Everyone thinks that Saint Sovereigns are Saint Sovereigns, but that's not the case. This era is no longer the era of Saint Sovereigns. Xia Yongxuan sighed, feeling lonely. In the past, we didn't know, but now we know. The deep blue world is gradually declining, and it can no longer support the power of a Saint Sovereign. Therefore, this era is the era where Saint Sovereigns don't appear. Kong Lu explained. Saint Sovereign is actually a title for a fifth refinement exceptional expert. Chu Mu suddenly understood. It seemed like the 5 Saint Sovereigns of the Blue Sea human race weren't the 5 Saint Sovereigns, but 5 fifth refinement exceptional experts. Chapter 1937. Chu Mu had always thought of Saint Sovereigns and Saint Emperors as equals. Only now did he know that Saint Sovereigns were Saint Sovereigns and Saint Emperors were Saint Emperors. They were two completely different concepts. Saint Sovereigns were called Fifth Refinement Exceptional Experts. Exceptional experts used their Yuan Qi to refine the laws. However, Saint Emperors had already surpassed that level and were exploring the Great Tao. The deep blue world was declining day by day. That was because the Great Tao was declining. It could no longer support the Saint Emperors. Even the Saint Emperors' every action would have an obvious impact. Therefore, the Saint Emperors had no choice but to enter seclusion to break through to a higher level and leave the deep blue world. Therefore, this era was called the era where Saint Emperors did not appear. This was a secret that was passed down among the exceptional experts. The majority of first refinement exceptional experts did not know about it. Only those exceptional experts who had lived long enough would know about it. Although the 6 of you can enter the Ice Palace, you do not walk the Tao of Ice. Therefore, you cannot obtain my inheritance. Holy Master Ice's virtual image continued, however, since you can enter the Ice Palace, even if you are destined to be with me, I can't let you go back empty-handed. However, what kind of opportunity you can get depends on your own abilities. After saying that, the eyes of Saint Sovereign Ice's consciousness image lit up. 2 rays of icy blue light shot out. Immediately, an icy blue vortex appeared before everyone. Go in. What kind of fortune you can obtain will depend on your luck. Saint Sovereign Ice's consciousness image disappeared after saying that. Do you want to go in? Leiba looked at the blue vortex, then looked at the others and asked. Let's go in. Feng Wuhan said. He immediately stepped forward and entered the blue vortex. They couldn't get the inheritance of Saint Venerable Ice, because Saint Venerable Ice's consciousness had said very clearly that the inheritance was for cultivators of the Tao of Ice, and they weren't. However, even if it was given to them, whether they would accept it or not was another matter. Now that there were other fortunes, they obviously had to obtain them. What was the purpose of entering the secret realm? Of course, it was to obtain fortunes and increase one's strength. Now that the fortune was right in front of them, what was the point of not obtaining it? After Wind Without Trace stepped into the blue vortex, the others followed suit. The moment Chu Mu stepped in, he felt as though he was shuttling through time and space. Countless streams of blue light swirled before his eyes. After that, the scenery changed again. Chu Mu appeared in a strange mountain valley. Other than him, the other 5 people were not here. Maybe they had their own opportunities and appeared in other places. He quickly scanned the surroundings of the valley. The valley didn't look very big, and he could see the end of it with a single glance. It was strange because the valley seemed to be divided into 2 halves by an invisible force. One half was lush with grass and trees, full of vitality, while the other half was dry and cracked, full of sand and rocks, full of death. Life and death split. Chu Mu frowned slightly. His divine sense spread out and encapsulated the entire valley. Half was filled with life, while the other half was filled with deathly stillness. The contrast was very obvious. Other than using his soul power to sense, Chu Mu also walked back and forth. He walked into the place filled with life and felt the powerful life force, then walked into the place filled with deathly stillness. He walked back and forth a few times, scanning with his divine sense, but he did not find any treasures. Chu Mu frowned, but he was not willing to give up. Just like Saint Sovereign Ice's consciousness image had said, the fortune one could obtain depended on one's own ability. Luck also played a part in one's ability. This valley was so strange. Half of it was alive, half of it was dead. There must be some treasure in it. It was just that Chu Mu had not found it yet. Calm down, there's no need to rush, Chu Mu said to himself. He took a deep breath to calm himself down. The sound of his heartbeat became very clear. His thoughts gradually spread out along with the power of his soul. His breathing also became more and more subtle. Finally, it disappeared. Time passed slowly. Chu Mu gradually felt as if he had become one with the surrounding air. As the air spread out, he gradually became one with the valley. Everything in the valley was under his control in great detail. It felt like his thoughts were gradually penetrating deeper into the valley. Half an hour later, everything in the valley was under Chu Mu's control. In the half of the life force there was a dense life force. In the other half of the deathly stillness, there was a shocking deathly stillness. Moreover, these 2 forces carried a kind of sharpness, a sharpness that belonged to a sword. Come out! With a loud shout, sound waves spread out, overlapping each other, directly attacking the life force and silence hidden in the depths of the valley. Under the influence of Chu Mu's power, the 2 forces hidden in the valley suddenly appeared and floated in the air. The 2 forces were in the shape of swords, about the size of a finger. One was green, full of vitality, while the other was gray, full of deathly stillness. Chu Mu's gaze immediately fell on the 2 small sword shadows. Come! With a low roar, Chu Mu extended his hand and grabbed at the air. Under his powerful strength, he immediately grabbed the sword image brimming with vitality. However, the sword image struggled and instantly broke free from Chu Mu's hand. With a flash of light, it slashed out a sword aura. Cyan-colored sword chi, carrying an incomparably dense life force, shot towards Chu Mu. That sword chi instantly transformed into a cyan lotus. Its petals bloomed wave after wave, and every time it bloomed, a wave of sword chi would shoot out in all directions. A portion of it would shoot towards Chu Mu, filling the entire valley. Chu Mu attacked, continuously shattering the sword aura. However, the green lotuses continued to blossom, as if there was no limit. Wave after wave of sword aura continuously shot out in a continuous and endless manner. At the same time, the sword shadow that was filled with deathly stillness also pierced through the void, shooting out a grayish-white sword chi. There was only one sword chi, but it carried a shocking deathly intent. It was capable of destroying everything in the world. Even the void could not resist it. Chu Mu's body tensed up and his hair stood on end. Endless vitality, deathly stillness, what a terrifying power! Chu Mu was not afraid. Instead, he was excited, because the stronger it was, the more useful it would be after he subdued it. Blood prison burning heaven. Sword domain change. Using the 2 secret skills, his strength immediately increased. He slashed out with both swords, and his terrifying power shattered the gray-white, deathly still sword chi. He then shattered the green sword chi, and the 2 swords crossed, unleashing the heaven and earth cross slash. The resplendent cross-shaped sword light tore apart the green lotus, causing it to shatter. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chu Mu attacked with all his strength. 2 rays of sword aura shot out and separately attacked the 2 sword images. His figure flashed and he used sword aura shadow. He immediately appeared beside the cyan-colored sword image and grabbed it with one hand. A powerful force gathered in his palm and grabbed the sword shadow. The green sword shadow instantly exploded with a tyrannical power, trying to shake off Chu Mu's palm. However, Chu Mu was already prepared. He used all his strength and used a power dissipation technique to dissipate the power of the sword shadow and capture it. His body flashed again, and he appeared beside the gray sword shadow. Using the same method, he grabbed the gray sword shadow with his left hand. Chu Mu grabbed the 2 sword shadows. All resistance was dissipated by him. They could not escape. Suppress. Without any hesitation, Chu Mu exploded with power again and used the 2nd level of Sword God's Descent to suppress the 2 sword shadows. The power turned into streaks and wrapped around the 2 sword shadows. They lost all resistance and could not move at all. Congratulations, Destined One. You have obtained the life and death sword spirit. Holy Sovereign Ice's voice suddenly sounded in the sky above the valley. However, there was only Chu Mu in the valley. Life and death sword spirits. Chu Mu repeated. The life and death sword spirits are a unique treasure that I have obtained. They are a set of unique treasures. Among the various treasures that I have collected, they are in the top 3. Holy Sovereign Ice's voice sounded again. The life and death sword spirits can be refined into a spiritual sword to increase the power of the spiritual sword. You can also comprehend powerful sword moves from the life and death sword spirit. The 2 spiritual swords that have been refined into the life and death sword spirits can cooperate with each other and become even more mysterious. However, you must remember that the life and death sword spirits can only be refined once. Chu Mu listened attentively. He heard every word that Holy Sovereign Ice said clearly and could understand it. According to what Holy Sovereign Ice said, the life and death sword spirits were prepared for me. Chu Mu thought. The life and death sword spirits were 2 sword spirit. If he wanted to refine them, he had to refine them into 2 spiritual swords. Furthermore, after refining the life and death sword spirits, not only would the spiritual swords become more powerful, but the combination of the 2 spiritual swords would also become more mysterious. Among sword cultivators, most of them used a single sword. Very few of them used 2 swords. Among the sword cultivators that Chu Mu had met who used 2 swords, none of them had mastered the true dual sword skill. When the life and death sword spirits were refined into a spiritual sword, the dual sword skill would be more mysterious and powerful. However, the life and death sword spirits could only be refined once. In other words, if Chu Mu refined them now, he would not be able to separate them and refine them into other spiritual swords in the future. I have the eternal spiritual sword and the silver light spiritual sword. The eternal spiritual sword can be refined into a sword spirit. It seems a bit wasteful to refine the silver light spiritual sword's sword spirit. Chu Mu thought. The silver light spiritual sword was just a temporary spiritual sword. When the annihilation sword essence was completely formed, he could cast the primordial spiritual sword embryo that had been nurtured in his dantian for many years into the annihilation spiritual sword. That was the spiritual sword that Chu Mu really wanted. In that case, I will wait until the annihilation spiritual sword is cast and then refine the sword spirit completely. Chapter 1938. Ha 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 ha, I never thought that I would be able to obtain such a good item. Under the lightning region, tens of thousands of lightning bolts struck, as if it was about to destroy the earth, turning it into a sea of lightning. Leba rushed out from the countless lightning bolt. He was in a sorry state, his body was charred black, and he seemed to be seriously injured. However, he was extremely excited, because he was holding a heart-like object tightly in his hands. That heart-like object was purple in color, with countless electric arcs surrounding it. Inside, it was like a sea of lightning, like a miniature version of the lightning region. This was the thunderbolt core that had been nurtured by the lightning region for countless years. It was also one of the treasures that the Ice Sovereign had collected. The Ice Sovereign was extremely powerful, and he was one of the best among the fifth refinement exceptional experts. He had experienced a lot in his life, and the treasures that he had collected were innumerable. Some of them were even super treasures. Leba was a lightning cultivator. After obtaining the Thunderbolt core and refining it, not only would his cultivation increase faster in the future, but his combat strength would also become stronger. The place that Feng Wuhan had entered was a place of storms. Countless storms were raging, as if they could destroy the world. Naturally, he had also obtained the treasure that was nurtured within the stormy demonic spirit. Feng Wuhan mainly cultivated the Wind Dao. As long as he could refine the stormy demonic spirit, his comprehension of the Wind Dao would deepen, and his strength would also increase. The opportunities that the Ice Sovereign had arranged were very suitable for everyone. Of course, although they were suitable, it would depend on one's own ability to obtain them. For example, Chu Mu. If he did not discover the two sword spirits of life and death, and if he could not subdue them, it would be useless even if he knew about it. Leba, if he could not obtain the Thunderbolt core from the lightning region, it would be useless as well. Feng Wuhan had obtained the stormy demonic spirit, and Wang Sun had obtained the dark cloak, a treasure. After refining and wearing it, it would allow him to escape into the darkness of the void, making him even more secretive. Kong Lu had obtained the void armor, a treasure armor that contained the power of the void. Not only did it have amazing defensive capabilities, but it could also increase the power of space that Kong Lu had grasped. Xia Yongshuan was a sword cultivator, but the Dao that he cultivated was different from others. It was a rare Dao. Great sorrow. The path of great compassion was a path of 7 emotions and 6 desires. It was very difficult to cultivate and comprehend. Since ancient times, very few cultivators had taken this path. Ice Saint Master was indeed a powerful Saint Master. Among his treasures, there were treasures related to the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Moreover, they were coincidentally related to the way of sorrow. Great Compassion Hoop. The 6 of them entered the blue vortex door and appeared in different places, obtaining their own fortuitous encounters. In the Life and Death Valley, Chu Mu was refining the sword spirit of life. His plan was to refine the sword spirit of life into the eternal spiritual sword and the sword spirit of death into the annihilation spiritual sword. However, the annihilation sword intent had not completely taken shape, so he could not nurture the annihilation spiritual sword. He temporarily put away the sword spirit of death and only refined the sword spirit of life. It was not difficult to refine the sword spirit of life. After a few hours, Chu Mu successfully refined the sword spirit of life into the eternal spiritual sword. Immediately, the eternal spiritual sword hummed as if it was very happy. The successful refinement of the sword spirit of life greatly increased the spirituality of the eternal spiritual sword. It rose from the level of a lower-grade spiritual sword to a middle-grade spiritual sword. The eternal spiritual sword was personally nurtured by Chu Mu and was 100% compatible with Chu Mu. Because of the eternal power, the lower-grade eternal spiritual sword was comparable to an ordinary middle-grade spiritual sword. It was also because of this that it was more difficult to upgrade it. After a few decades, It had only reached the peak of the lower-grade spiritual sword. However, if it wanted to upgrade it, it would need at least another few decades. Now, after refining the sword spirit of life, its spirituality had increased greatly. It had surpassed the shackles between the lower-grade spiritual sword and the middle-grade spiritual sword and upgraded to a middle-grade spiritual sword. Moreover, it had not just reached the level of a middle-grade spiritual sword. The upgrade of a spiritual sword's grade would obviously increase the power of the sword. In other words, the current eternal spiritual sword's power had increased. Moreover, because of the refinement of the sword spirit of life, the increase was even greater. Originally, the middle-grade eternal spiritual sword was comparable to an ordinary upper-grade spiritual sword. Because of the sword spirit of life, its power was close to an ordinary supreme-grade spiritual sword. With Chu Mu's current strength, it was impossible for him to support the consumption of a supreme-grade spiritual sword. However, the eternal spiritual sword was a middle-grade spiritual sword. Moreover, it was a middle-grade spiritual sword that he had nurtured, so he could use it freely. Think about it, a middle-grade spiritual sword that had the power of a supreme-grade spiritual sword. How terrifying was that? After refining, Chu Mu held the eternal spiritual sword. Without using the silver light spiritual sword, his strength had increased from the peak of the initial second refining to the middle second refining. If he used the silver light spiritual sword, his strength would be even more powerful. When the annihilation sword essence is formed and the annihilation spiritual sword is nurtured, then I will refine the sword spirit of life and death. Under the circumstances of using two swords, my strength will definitely increase by several times. Chu Mu thought to himself. He was extremely excited and had a strong sense of anticipation. He could not wait to master the annihilation spiritual sword. However, there was still some time before the annihilation sword essence was fully formed. He could only wait patiently. I wonder what the other few have obtained? Chu Mu thought to himself. With a thought, he left the valley that had returned to normal. Without the life and death sword spirits, the strange phenomenon in the valley naturally disappeared. Figures appeared in the main hall one after another. Everyone had a smile on their faces. Obviously, they had gained a lot. Everyone, let's talk about what we have gained this time. Feng Wuhan smiled and said, let's start with me. I have obtained the stormy demonic spirit. After refining it, it can increase my comprehension of the way of the wind and increase the power of the way of the wind. Since Feng Wuhan had said so, the others did not hide anything. They all spoke of their gains. Great. This time, all of us have gained quite a lot. As long as we refine the supreme treasures that we have obtained, our strength will increase significantly. Moreover, we have the frigid jade essence. If we refine it, we will definitely be able to go deeper in the refinement of the laws. It will improve our cultivation and strength. Kong Lu was overjoyed. The improvement of one person's strength was only a matter of one person. However, if everyone could become stronger, it would directly affect the strength of their alliance. Whether or not they could go up against the imperial dynasty was their goal. Now they had achieved half of it. This secret realm is not bad. The Ice Palace also has enough defensive power. Why don't we refine the treasures that we have obtained here first? After that, we can refine the frigid jade essence to increase our cultivation. This suggestion was approved by everyone. Chu Mu had already refined the life sword spirit of the life and death sword spirit. He would not refine the death sword spirit for the time being. However, it was not that he had nothing to do. He summoned the eternal spiritual sword and immersed his consciousness into it to sense it carefully. According to the Ice Saint Sovereign, the life and death sword spirits were among the top 3 treasures that he had collected. They were extremely precious because of their shocking value. It could be refined into a spiritual sword, increasing the spiritual quality of the spiritual sword, and increasing the power of the spiritual sword. When the two swords worked together, the life and death sword spirits could resonate and become even more mysterious, increasing the power of the spiritual sword. Moreover, whether it was the life sword spirit or the death sword spirit, they both contained shocking power. One could comprehend them and comprehend powerful sword moves from them. If the Ice Saint Sovereign thought that sword moves were powerful, they would definitely be extraordinary. After all, the Ice Saint Sovereign was a peerless expert at the peak of the fifth refinement. Compared to the heavenly sword Saint Sovereign, he would only be stronger. Hence, Chu Mu was looking forward to the sword moves. Another figure flew across the sky. He was extremely fast and gave off a shocking aura. That's the 18th one. Our Sky Mountain region is just a small and remote region. What happened? Why are there 18 peerless experts from the outer region? Terrifying. This is too terrifying. The aura of the peerless experts. The Sky Mountain region only had one peerless expert a few 100,000 years ago. After that, there were no more peerless experts. It could be said that the Sky Mountain region was a place that lacked cultivation resources. The peerless experts from the outer regions would not come here. But now, not only had they come, but there were 18 of them. Could it be that some treasure has appeared in our Sky Mountain region? It's possible. Only some great treasure would attract so many peerless experts. One after another, the peerless experts came from all directions and gathered in the Sky Mountain region. Moreover, all of them were heading towards the Sky Mountain region where the Sky Mountain Palace was located. The people of the Sky Mountain Palace were all expelled. The Sky Mountain Palace was occupied by the peerless experts. However, the disciples of the Sky Mountain Palace could not object. Even though the Sky Mountain Palace was the strongest force in the Sky Mountain region, the strongest cultivator was only a saint. They could not compete with any of the peerless experts. In order to not be completely annihilated, the Celestial Mountain Palace's palace master could only swallow his anger. He led his disciples and rapidly left the Celestial Mountain Palace to other places. Even so, they were still paying attention to the situation. Once they had the opportunity, they would definitely take back the Celestial Mountain Palace. However, the people of the Sky Mountain Palace, including the people of the Sky Mountain region, did not know that these peerless experts had entered the Sky Mountain region for Chu Mu and the others. They also did not know that in the Sky Mountain region of the Sky Mountain Palace, there was a door that led to the Ice Secret Territory. That Ice Secret Territory had been left behind by the peerless expert of the fifth refinement, the Ice Holy Master. Chu Mu and the others were in the Ice Palace of the Ice Secret Territory, refining treasures and increasing their strength. Time passed little by little. More and more peerless experts entered the Sky Mountain region. They brought great destruction to the Sky Mountain region. The time for Chu Mu and the others to come out was getting closer and closer. Chapter 1939. The shocking aura was like a black cloud, hovering above the Sky Mountain, emitting terrifying fluctuations. This aura was extremely chaotic, coming from different experts. They collided with each other like waves crashing into each other, creating even more terrifying ripples. The cultivators of the Sky Mountain domain couldn't get close because once they entered the range, they would be affected by the aura. Their minds would be shaken, and the more serious ones would have their minds broken. However, there were some outstanding cultivators who were able to get close to a certain range and use the terrifying aura to temper their wills. In the Sky Mountain domain, supreme experts were extremely rare. Some cultivators couldn't even see a single one in their entire life. How could it be like now? Hundreds of supreme experts had all entered the Sky Mountain domain and occupied the entire region with the Sky Mountain domain as the center. The 4 Imperial Guards of the Imperial Clan directly occupied the main palace of the Sky Mountain domain. The other side palaces were occupied by other supreme experts. Their purpose in coming here was Chu Mu, so there was no conflict between them. Although Chu Mu had the divine sealing compass that could hide the heavenly secrets in this world, it wasn't only the path of divination that could find a person's whereabouts. The path of divination was merely a method. No matter if it was the Imperial clan or the Sky clan, they all had their own perfect intelligence network. In a situation where divination was ineffective, other methods were naturally activated. There were specialized people who investigated and analyzed all kinds of clues. In the end, they confirmed that Chu Mu had entered the Sky Mountain domain. It had to be said that these perfect intelligence networks were amazing. They couldn't find any clues, and after analyzing the clues, they finally found the target's whereabouts. During this period of time, they had to spend a lot of time and effort. It was even more difficult than divination. However, this was also to prevent treasures from obscuring heaven's secrets. The Imperial Guards of the Imperial Clan, the Divine Forbidden Guards of the Sky Clan, and the supreme experts of the human race were mostly gathered in the Sky Mountain domain. With the Sky Mountain domain as the center, they were all waiting for Chu Mu's appearance. In the Ice Palace, everyone had finished their cultivation. Not only had they refined the treasures they had obtained, they had also refined the frigid ice chalcedony. The frigid ice chalcedony contained an incomparably pure energy that could be absorbed and refined. Refining it would not increase one's cultivation base, but it could assist one in refining the power of law. In other words, it could speed up the refinement of the power of law. Although the frigid ice chalcedony was very good, it was of no use to Chu Mu at all. His cultivation was at the limit of the saint level, and he was not a peerless expert. He did not control the power of laws but the true meaning. Of course, if he had already refined his true intent and truly stepped into the realm of a peerless expert, this frigid ice chalcedony would still be extremely useful to him. Unfortunately, Chu Mu did not have a suitable cultivation technique. However, the frigid ice chalcedony was evenly distributed. Although Chu Mu could not use it now, it did not mean that he could not use it in the future. Thus, he temporarily put it away. After the others refined the frigid ice chalcedony and refined the treasures they had obtained, their cultivation base had all increased, and their strength had also increased. The weakest among them, Wang Sun, had advanced from the early stage of the second refinement to the middle stage of the second refinement. Leiba had advanced from the middle stage of the second refinement to the high stage of the second refinement. Kong Lu had also advanced from the middle stage of the second refinement to the high stage of the second refinement. Xia Yongxuan had advanced from the high stage of the second refinement to the peak of the second refinement. As for Feng Wuhan, he had advanced from the peak of the second refinement to the limit of the second refinement. Although this trip to the Ice Secret Realm had not allowed them to break through to the third refinement, it had allowed their strength to increase significantly. In fact, it was easier said than done to break through to the third refinement. Many experts at the limit of the second refinement were stuck at that step, unable to break through for the rest of their lives. One had to know that any third refinement peerless expert could become the leader of a superpower. However, to be able to break through a small level was already an extremely rare thing. Their overall strength had increased by a level. This time, we have returned with a rewarding journey. Feng Wuhan laughed. Bastards of the Imperial Court, your Grandpa Lei cannot wait to let you all taste the power of lightning. Leiba laughed. He clenched his fists and lightning flashed. A powerful energy rippled in all directions. The six of them walked out of the Ice Palace, and the doors of the palace closed once again. Although they did not obtain the inheritance of the Ice Saint Sovereign, each of them had obtained a suitable reward. That was enough for them. After walking out of the Ice Palace, everyone turned around and bowed towards the Ice Palace. Shortly after, they looked at each other and laughed loudly. They then quickly walked towards the exit of the Ice Secret Realm. After walking out of the Ice Palace, they did not encounter any Ice Demon Generals or Ice Demons. This made their plan to kill more Ice Demon Generals and Ice Demons to obtain the frigid Ice Chalcedony fall through. After leaving the Ice Secret Realm, they appeared in the cave. As soon as they appeared, they immediately felt a powerful aura circling around the cave. It filled the air and filled the surroundings. So many peerless experts. Everyone's expression changed. Could it be that the ice secret realm has been discovered? Leba asked. No, it shouldn't be. If it has been discovered, that group of peerless experts will definitely appear here. Kong Lu said calmly. Moreover, the spatial seal that I set up is not damaged at all. The heavenly mountain region is just a small region that lacks vitality. A peerless expert only appeared a few 100,000 years ago. After that, there were no more peerless experts. If it wasn't for the ice secret realm, why would there be so many peerless experts here? Feng Wuhan seemed to be talking to himself. Shortly after, he seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed and he looked at Chu Mu. The others also seemed to have thought of something and they all looked at Chu Mu. Could it be that they know Chu Mu's whereabouts and they are all here for Chu Mu? It seemed that this was the only guess. After all, the Sky Clan had issued the Heavenly Kill Order. They were using great rewards to lure the peerless experts of various races to find Chu Mu and kill Chu Mu. Thinking about it, there were more than 100 peerless experts. Chu Mu immediately revealed a smile. His eyes were filled with shocking battle intent and monstrous killing intent. More than 100 peerless experts had gathered in the Heavenly Mountain region. Their goal was to kill him. They really think highly of me, Chu Mu whispered. Even though he had the divine sealing compass which eliminated the possibility of him being calculated, it did not eliminate other methods. Therefore, Chu Mu did not find it strange that his tracks were found. After all, it had been a few months since he had returned to the deep blue continent. Everyone, these people are here for me, not you, so. Chu Mu looked at the crowd and spoke. However, he was interrupted before he could finish. Ha 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 ha, my strength has just increased and I was just about to have a big battle. I didn't expect that someone would send himself to his death. Leba laughed. I also want to test the strength of the second refinement and the power of the storm demon spirit. Feng Wuhan smiled gently. My sword is thirsting for blood. Xia Yongxuan had a lonely expression. You stole what I wanted to say. Wang Sun glanced at Xia Yongxuan and said, Chu Mu, the 6 of us have formed the Ancient Sword Alliance. We will advance and retreat together, whether it is against the imperial court or against other enemies. Kong Lu looked at Chu Mu and said solemnly. Previously, when they had formed the Ancient Sword Alliance, they had made a heavenly oath to fight against the imperial court. There was no other reason. However, after the trip to the ice secret territory, their relationship had deepened. They had gone from ordinary friends to friends who could trust each other. Moreover, they had also seen Chu Mu's potential. He was not a peerless expert, but he could explode with the strength of the second refinement and even the third refinement. How shocking was that? As long as he did not die, he would definitely become a Saint Sovereign expert in the future. There were not many Saint Sovereigns in the deep blue world. Every one of them could leave their name in history. This was a kind of investment, a gamble. The wager might be their lives, but they did not hesitate. Perhaps there were other reasons, but no matter what, in the face of hundreds or even more absolute experts, they still stood on the same battlefront as him. Facing the powerful enemies together, Chu Mu was grateful from the bottom of his heart. Brothers, since that's the case, then let our ancient sword alliance turn the world upside down and make them tremble in fear. Chu Mu's eyes flickered with a shocking glint as he spoke. All right, kill them until they tremble in fear. Kill them until they tremble in fear. Kill. The few of them laughed loudly. They felt that their relationship had deepened. They had vaguely turned from friends who could trust each other to brothers who could entrust their lives to each other. Kong Lu waved his hands and formed hand seals, unlocking the spatial seal. Once the spatial seal was unlocked, everyone's figures flashed as they flew out of the cave. Unlocking the spatial seal would consume Kong Lu's energy, but after his cultivation had increased, a portion of his energy would be consumed. He would quickly recover after taking medicinal pills. Soon, Chu Mu's group of 6 rushed out of the cave and flew into the sky. The moment they appeared, hundreds of auras gathered from all directions and swept over. Then, they all gathered on Chu Mu's body. All those who oppose our imperial court must die. The 4 royal guards of the imperial court soared through the air. Those who offend the celestial clan are doomed. The 8 forbidden guards of the celestial clan also charged over. Chu Mu, it's time for you to die. Chu Mu's life is mine. The peerless experts of the human clan also charged over from all directions. Their voices and killing intent were not concealed in the slightest. Could it be that this group of peerless experts entered the heavenly mountain domain to kill? The cultivators of the heavenly mountain domain were dumbfounded when they heard this. What kind of person was worth hundreds of peerless experts chasing after? As a small domain without any peerless experts, they were not qualified to know about the heavenly kill order of the celestial clan. Chapter 1940. In the sky above the sky mountain region, figures rushed over quickly. Each of them exuded an extremely shocking aura. It was like a volcano erupting with magma, like the roar of the sea with endless waves, like a storm that destroyed everything, or like a heavenly sword that cut through the void. The divine guard of the Sky Clan was high and mighty. The Imperial Guard had a terrifying aura that was between life and death. The many peerless experts of the human clan all had different auras. At this moment, they all rushed towards Chu Mu and locked onto him. This was a great honor. It was enough to make many people tremble in fear. That person is Feng Wuhan, and Xia Yongxuan. The other 5 people beside Chu Mu were all recognized. The 5 of them were peerless experts of the second refinement. Among the peerless experts, they were quite famous, especially Feng Wuhan, Xia Yongxuan, and Kong Lu. The limit of the second refinement. The peak of the second refinement. High second refinement. Middle second refinement. Their cultivation seems to have broken through. Could it be that they were hiding their cultivation before? Or is there some treasure in this sky mountain? The cultivation level and strength of these famous peerless experts were not a secret. Even the cultivation techniques they practiced were not a secret. But now, the cultivation level was different from what they knew. It was inevitable that it would arouse suspicion. At the same time, they were also afraid. The weakest of the 5 peerless experts of the second refinement was at the middle second refinement. Once they stood on Chu Mu's side, it would not be easy to kill Chu Mu. They would have to pay a great price. The Imperial Court will only kill Chu Mu. Anyone who interferes will be killed without mercy. An Imperial Guard said coldly. As the secret power of the Imperial dynasty, the Imperial Guards, although they were strong and had shocking methods, they didn't want any unforeseen circumstances to occur during the mission. Feng Wuhan and the others were too strong. If there were unforeseen circumstances, it would affect their mission. But maybe because the Imperial dynasty was used to being overbearing, or maybe because the Imperial Guards were all like that, they didn't hold back at all and directly threatened him. My celestial race is not willing to kill more people. You guys back off. The leader of the Divine Guard 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 of the Divine Guard. This was because the 8 divine forbidden guards were all second refinement peerless powerhouses. The captain was at the peak of the second refinement, and the weakest of the others was at the high level of the second refinement. This kind of strength could be considered very strong. However, Feng Wuhan and the others were not weak either. If they wholeheartedly helped Chu Mu, it would be very difficult to kill Chu Mu. Moreover, they would have to pay a heavy price. The people of Tian clan valued their own lives very much, especially when facing other races. There was always a kind of pride and a sense of superiority in their bones. Feng Wuhan, my target is Chu Mu. It has nothing to do with you guys. A peak second refinement expert of the human race said. Don't think that you guys can fight against us. Another peak second refinement expert said coldly. No matter how they threatened, no matter how oppressive their auras were, Wind without trace and the others remained unmoved. Whoever wants to die, come up. Your Grandpa Lei will fulfill your wish. Leiba shouted. Terrifying lightning spread out from his body and traces of destructive chi spread out, causing the group of people's faces to change drastically. Leiba, who was at the high level of the second refinement, actually made some peak second refinement experts feel threatened. Although the rewards of the Tian clan are good, you still need to be alive to get it. As Kong Lu waved his hand casually, the power of space gradually spread out. This kind of fluctuation contained a shocking destructive power, as if it could tear the void apart at any time. Once the void was torn apart, there would definitely be terrifying spatial cracks that would be a threat to everyone. Wang Sun seemed to be holding something in his hand. That was his sword, an invisible and formless sword. His figure flashed and instantly vanished, entering the darkness of the void. He was like a hidden poisonous snake, waiting for an opportunity to deliver a fatal blow. Clear wind. As if he was chanting, Feng Wuhan held the clear wind spirit sword in his hand and waved it gently. The sword slashed out in all directions. Wind blew out from nowhere and surrounded his body like a spirit of the wind. My sword hasn't tasted human blood for dozens of years. Xia Yongxuan sighed softly. His expression was desolate, as if he had lost something. His voice rang out and entered everyone's ears, causing them to fall into a trance. For some reason, a sense of sadness rose from their hearts. Those first refinement experts with weaker cultivations were unknowingly overwhelmed by sadness. They had no idea why they were feeling sad. A faint light spread out from between the eyebrows of the divine guard of the Tian clan, directly dispelling Xia Yongxuan's sadness. The faces of the 4 imperial guards were covered by their sinister golden helmets. Only their eyes were exposed. They looked incomparably cold, as if they didn't belong to a living person. There was a deathly stillness in their eyes. As for the other peerless experts of the human clan, those with higher cultivations, such as those at the high level of the second refinement and the peak of the second refinement, although they were slightly affected, they quickly recovered. However, when they looked at Xia Yongxuan, their eyes were filled with deep fear. In their eyes, Xia Yongxuan was undoubtedly an even more terrifying opponent than Feng Wuhan. Although Xia Yongxuan's cultivation was inferior to Feng Wuhan's, the effect of his sadness was too great. Just imagine, if they were affected by Xia Yongxuan's sadness in battle, even if it only affected them for an instant, they might lose the initiative. If it was serious, they might even be killed. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. The captain of the divine guard of the Tian clan raged. Set up the formation. With that order, the 8 divine guard of the Tian clan immediately set up a grand formation. Their auras linked together, growing and multiplying endlessly. The 4 imperial guardians took a step forward at the same time, stepping on the void. An incomparably terrifying rumbling sound rang out as countless ripples spread out in all directions. In the next breath, the silhouettes of the 4 imperial guardians disappeared. They hadn't truly disappeared. They also didn't have the ability to escape into the void. The reason they seemed to have disappeared was because their speed was too fast. In that instant they seemed to have teleported. In an instant the 4 figures appeared around Chu Mu. The golden swords in their hands slashed down from the sky. A terrifying killing intent caused the void beneath the swords to shatter inch by inch. The instant the Imperial Guards attacked, Chu Mu directly summoned his 2 swords and used blood hell burning the heavens. He used the sword domain transformation. With both swords in hand, he instantly slashed out. The cross-sword light tore through the sky and directly imprinted itself on the body of one of the Imperial Guards, forcing him back. At the same time, the sword chi image was used. It shattered under the 3 golden sword light. The Imperial Guard that had been struck by Chu Mu's cross sword light had a deep cross mark on his chest. The mark had penetrated his armor and pierced deep into his flesh. That sword strike was the heaven and earth cross slash. Its power was shocking. It completely had the destructive power of the peak of the high second refinement. As for the 4 Imperial Guards, they were only at the high second refinement. However, that sword strike had not been able to kill him. It had only injured him. This made Chu Mu surprised at the defensive power of the Imperial Guard's armor. A strange scene appeared. The flesh under the cross mark wriggled and quickly recovered. In the end, even the Imperial Guard's golden armor was restored. This is... Chu Mu was slightly stunned. Self-healing from injuries was nothing strange. Chu Mu could also do it. Although it was rare to see a broken armor heal itself, it still existed. However, the self-healing of the Imperial Guard revealed a strange feeling. It was as if the Imperial Guard's golden armor was one with his flesh and blood. There was no time for Chu Mu to think properly. The 4 Imperial Guards had attacked once again. They had the strength of the high second refinement. Their cooperation was also very good. They could fight against an ordinary expert at the peak of the second refinement. Moreover, they had the characteristic of being immortal. In a battle, they could drag an expert at the peak of the second refinement to death. However, Chu Mu was not an ordinary expert at the peak of the second refinement. When he fully unleashed his battle strength, he had the strength of the peak of the second refinement or even half a step to the third refinement. Sword God descends. The power of the secret technique was activated. The sharpness of the light increased sharply. His strength instantly rose to the level of half a step to the third refinement. Under the dual swords, the 4 Imperial Guards had no ability to resist at all. The difference between the high second refinement and half a step to the third refinement was too obvious. In the blink of an eye, the golden armor on each of the Imperial Guards was shattered. Their flesh and blood were badly mangled. However, they quickly wriggled and recovered quickly. Their recovery speed was not inferior to the Ice Demon Generals. This was the origin of the Imperial Guard's name, the Immortal Imperial Guards. They had an extremely strong defense and an extremely fast regenerative ability. Moreover, their cultivation was to fuse their armor with their flesh and blood, turning them into a kind of monster that was neither alive nor dead. However, in Chu Mu's opinion, there was a limit to all the so-called immortality. When that limit was exceeded, they would die. For example, under the absolute difference in strength, the 4 Imperial Guards had no ability to resist at all. Kill, kill, kill. Under the sword light, the 4 Imperial Guards' bodies shattered and collapsed. The strange thing was that with a bit of flesh and blood as the center, the rest of the flesh and blood quickly drifted over in an attempt to recover. Shatter! Chu Mu struck out again, shattering the flesh and blood that had gathered together. However, after the flesh and blood was shattered, it gathered together again. It was very terrifying. On the other side, the 8 Divine Guard of the Divine Tribe, who had set up the formation, were blocked by Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan. The other peerless experts of the human tribe, who had charged over, were fighting with the Thunder Tyrant's airflow. Wang Sun hid in the dark layer of the void, looking for an opportunity to kill with one strike. This was the battle between Chu Mu and the other 5 against over 100 peerless experts. Chapter 1941. Boom! As he waved his fists, countless bolts of lightning leaped from his gloves. Lightning arcs filled the air, condensing into terrifying bolts of purple lightning. They descended from the sky and bombarded his enemies. With the strength of an advanced second refinement and the power of the Thunderbolt core, each bolt of lightning carried a terrifying destructive power. There seemed to be a trace of destructive power faintly contained within it, making one's heart palpitate. Even a peak second refinement expert did not dare to underestimate it. Kong Lu gently clenched his fist, and the space in front of him immediately collapsed. Under the crack, a terrifying power directly tore apart a peak second refinement expert. Even his primordial spirit could not escape and was directly sucked into the spatial crack. Facing the attacks of others, Kong Lu had a great advantage. Wearing the void armor, he could easily escape into the void and avoid the attacks, unless the attacks were powerful enough to break through the void. To a second refinement peerless powerhouse, breaking through the void was not difficult. However, to break through the void and injure the target within the spatial crack was very difficult. Unless one had the strength of the third refinement, that was impossible. Wang Sun's figure suddenly flashed. With a wave of his right hand, he pierced through the forehead of a peak first refinement expert, shattering his primordial spirit. In the next breath, he disappeared again, hiding in the dark side of space. The three of them had all brought out their true strength. As there were many strong enemies, they could not afford to relax. Fortunately, although there were many strong enemies, they were like a sheet of loose sand. There was no organization, and there was no tacit cooperation between them. They fought for themselves. After all, this group of peerless experts came from different sects or independent cultivators. They were competitors among themselves. They all wanted to kill Chu Mu and obtain the Divine Clan's reward. They did not trust each other at all. The battle formation set up by the 8 Divine Clan Forbidden Guards allowed the 8 people's strength to be integrated into one. They advanced and retreated according to the rules, and had both offensive and defensive capabilities. Their strength had surpassed the peak of second refinement and stepped into the half-step third refinement. Feng Wuhan was at the peak of second refinement. When he used the storm demon spirit, his strength would increase further. Xia Yongxuan was at the peak of second refinement. When he used his full strength, he was close to the peak of second refinement. The two of them worked together and barely managed to resist the 8 Divine Clan Forbidden Guards. Under Chu Mu's sword, the 4 Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood were torn apart, but they reassembled again and again, only to be scattered by Chu Mu again and again. What the hell is this? Chu Mu frowned. Although his strength had reached the half-step third refinement, it was because he had used various secret techniques. The sword domain transformation secret technique could be maintained for a long time. The blood prison secret technique could also be recovered by consuming blood essence pills. Only the sword god's descent secret technique could be recovered quickly by absorbing the essence of heaven and earth energy. However, the essence of heaven and earth energy was extremely precious. Therefore, once it was consumed, it could only be recovered slowly. It would usually take months or even years. Unfortunately, the second level of the sword god's descent secret technique was his greatest reliance. Once the secret technique's power was exhausted, his strength would decrease by 100-fold. At most, he would only be able to maintain the strength of an advanced second refinement. Fortunately, Chu Mu's mastery of the secret technique's power had become more unique. He only used the secret technique's power when he attacked with his sword. He didn't need to maintain it at all times to reduce the consumption of the secret technique's power. However, the 4 Imperial Guardians couldn't be completely destroyed. They didn't seem to have primordial spirits, or perhaps their primordial spirits had fused with their bodies. Unless their bodies were completely destroyed, they wouldn't die at all. Even if they were shattered, they could still reassemble. After being shattered again and again, Chu Mu also discovered that the speed at which the Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood reassembled had decreased. In other words, they weren't truly immortal. Every time they reassembled, they would consume a certain amount of energy. Once their energy was exhausted, they would also die. After discovering this, Chu Mu wasn't happy. This was because he silently calculated that if he wanted to completely destroy the 4 Imperial Guardians, the second level of the Sword God's Descent secret technique would consume a large portion of its power. Void Shatter. With a low roar, the space where the Imperial Guardian's flesh and blood were reassembling suddenly shattered. It turned into a black hole and directly swallowed the Imperial Guardian's flesh and blood, sucking it into the turbulence of the void. It turned out that when Kong Lu was dodging the enemy's attack, He happened to discover Chu Mu's situation and immediately came to his aid. Seeing the 4 Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood being sucked into the black hole, Chu Mu wasn't angry. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief. After nodding to Kong Lu, he charged towards the other Supreme Experts. Not only did these Supreme Experts not know Chu Mu, but they also didn't have any conflicts of interest before. However, this time, they were here to kill Chu Mu. Since that was the case, they were his enemies. Since they were his enemies, he couldn't show any mercy. I'll use you guys to test my newly comprehended sword move, Chu Mu thought. He originally planned to use this move to deal with the Imperial Guardians, but Kong Lu acted first and sucked them into the black hole. Sword move, Eternal Vitality. With a low roar, the eternal spiritual sword slashed forward. The sword's spirit of life, that had been refined into the eternal spiritual sword, seemed to have been activated. A strange power combined with Chu Mu's power. When the eternal spiritual sword attacked, it immediately condensed into a lotus burning with blood-red flames. As it spun, it blasted towards the group of Supreme Experts in front of him. The strongest of the Supreme Experts who wanted to kill Chu Mu was only at the peak of the second refinement. Facing Chu Mu's eternal vitality that was a half step to the third refinement, they didn't have much ability to resist. Under the blood-red lotus, one after another, the Supreme Experts of the first refinement were directly killed and turned into nothingness. Even their primordial spirits were completely destroyed. The Supreme Experts of the second refinement were extremely shocked and quickly attacked the blood-red lotus. 1 attack was ineffective, 2 attacks had an effect, and 3 attacks began to weaken the power of the blood-red lotus. However, this sword move was called Eternal Vitality. Within it, there was a force of vitality that caused the blood-red lotus to weaken and recover as it spun. The power of the eternal vitality was beyond Chu Mu's expectations. Perhaps in terms of absolute power, it wasn't as strong as the great heavenly might sword move or the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword move. However, it won in terms of toughness and strength. The eternal vitality wasn't absolute. There was a limit. After reaching the limit, the blood-red lotus trembled and immediately exploded, turning into countless sharp blood-red sword chi that tore through the sky. The group of Supreme Experts' expressions changed drastically. They were extremely shocked and hurriedly dodged or blocked. When all the blood-red sword chi disappeared, Chu Mu was also shocked by the damage caused by his sword move. More than 10 Supreme Experts of the first refinement were dead, and more than 10 were injured. 6 Supreme Experts of the second refinement were dead, and 5 were injured. One sword move, just one sword move, had caused such a terrifying amount of damage. This eternal vitality was really a shocking group attack move. Of course, it was also because Chu Mu used the strength of a half-step to the third refinement to perform this move. It was very difficult to kill Supreme Experts, unless the difference in strength was too great. Chu Mu's strength could be considered as a half-step to the third refinement, but his opponents weren't fools. They wouldn't stay where they were to be attacked by him. One sword move had caused so many casualties. This had already shocked them, and then they were terrified. This was the person they wanted to kill? Lei Ba and the others were also shocked. They knew that Chu Mu was powerful, but they didn't expect him to be so fierce. One sword move killed more than 20 Supreme Experts, and injured more than 20 of them. Blood sprayed out from the dead peerless experts like rain. Their corpses fell from a height of 1,000 meters. No matter how strong the peerless experts' bodies were, their flesh was lacerated and their bones were broken. Blood flowed out, dyeing the craters below them red. 4 Imperial guards were sucked into the spatial black hole, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. More than 20 Supreme Experts died, and their corpses fell from the sky. More than 20 Supreme Experts were injured. Such a terrifying result directly shocked the other Supreme Expert. Let's go. The few Supreme Experts didn't hesitate and quickly turned to leave. Although the rewards of the sky race were good, They could only enjoy them if they were alive. If they were dead, what was the use? Don't be afraid, he definitely doesn't have much strength left. There were also people who didn't want to leave just like that. Instead, they shouted loudly. As soon as they finished speaking, clouds suddenly filled the air in front of them. A wisp of extremely condensed sword light silently pierced through the clouds and pierced through them. They were only at the advanced second refinement, so how could they block Chumu, who was a half step to the third refinement and had used void step? Let's go! Let's go! This sword instantly killed an advanced second refinement expert, causing the fear in the hearts of those who were lucky to be magnified infinitely. They directly exploded with all their speed and quickly left. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 supreme experts who had tried to kill Chumu had died, and the rest fled. Next, it's you guys. Chumu didn't chase after the group of supreme experts because they were already scared out of their wits. He turned to look at the divine guards of the sky race who were surrounding Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan. His voice was filled with killing intent. Although Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan were powerful, they were suppressed by the 8 divine guards. They could only block and dodge, and it was difficult for them to counterattack. Kill! Leiba roared, and his fist struck the sky. Violent lightning fell from the sky and struck a divine guard. When the lightning struck the divine guard, it was blocked by a force and scattered. Void change rend. Kong Lu used his full strength and used an offensive secret technique. Unfortunately, with the advanced second refinement and the void armor activated, this move was enough to kill a peak second refinement expert and threaten a peak second refinement expert. However, it was still insufficient against a half step to the third refinement expert. Heavenly slaughter. Earthly calamity. At this moment, in the void, because of the fierce battle just now, the yuan qi of heaven and earth was chaotic and violent. It was an excellent environment, and it was suitable for the heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style to be used. Under the 2 swords, even the sky and earth were supported by his body. He attracted the power of the sky and earth, and with his own power as the control, it converged into the 2 swords. As the sword vibrated, he slashed out, and his body spun, and slashed out a second time. Chapter 1942. The 2 resplendent sword light were like crescent moons moving rapidly in the sky. They cut through the spatial barrier and charged towards the divine forbidden guard. The sword light could be seen by all the cultivators in the Tianshan region as long as they raised their heads. It was like a brand that was deeply engraved in everyone's mind. It was unforgettable. Heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style. 1 sword to break the sky, 1 sword to split the earth. It was earth-shattering and unparalleled. This was the most powerful move among the various sword styles that Chumu had mastered. Even the great heavenly might sword style was slightly inferior. If it weren't for Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan holding back the divine forbidden guard for him, once they formed a battle formation to deal with him, with his strength, he could only resist for a while. Once the power of the sword god's descent was exhausted, his strength would definitely decline. At that time, he wouldn't be a match for the divine forbidden guard at all. Now, Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan were at a disadvantage. It was fine if they didn't attack, but once they did, they used their most powerful killing moves. Leiba's attack and Kong Lu's attack couldn't threaten the divine forbidden guard under the battle formation. However, Chumu's heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style, when used with his half-step third refinement strength, had a terrifying power that could threaten the early third refinement. By the time the divine forbidden guard felt threatened, it was already too late. The 2 sword light had already arrived. Easily, the 2 sword light broke through the divine forbidden guard's battle formation. It cut through the body of 1 divine forbidden guard and instantly tore it apart. It rushed out and cut through the body of the 2nd divine forbidden guard. The terrifying power of the heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style also tore apart the primordial spirits of the 2 divine forbidden guards, completely killing them. The moment the battle formation's power was broken, the battle formation stopped operating. Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan immediately seized the opportunity and used their powerful sword move. The sword was like a cool breeze. As the cool breeze blew, it contained the destruction of a storm. The strength of the peak of the second refinement was unleashed to the extreme and surpassed. Under this sword, the divine forbidden guards that he had chosen were only at the high level of the second refinement. Even if they used their full strength, they would not be able to withstand it. Moreover, the moment the power of the battle formation was broken, they were also affected to a certain extent and their reactions were a step slower. This was also the price of a battle matrix. Forming a battle matrix would give one greater strength. If a battle matrix was forcibly broken, it would also be affected to a certain extent. Even if it was only a slight effect, it would be magnified 10 times or more in the eyes of the strong. Grief filled Xia Yongxuan's sword, and the world grieved as well. The divine guard, who had been affected by the destruction of the battle formation, lost the ability to resist in that instant. A sense of sorrow filled their hearts as they could not help but think of their sorrowful past. With a single slash, he killed the divine forbidden guard who was still grieving and unable to wake up in time. In the blink of an eye, after Chu Mu broke through the formation, 4 divine guards had died. Just as the remaining 4 divine guards broke free from their grief, incomparably sharp sword light flashed before their eyes, filling the world. 2 of them were Chu Mu's, 1 was Feng Wuhan's, and 1 was Xia Yongxuan's. Of the 2 divine guards that Chu Mu had chosen, 1 was at the peak of the second refinement, and the other was the captain at the peak of the second refinement. As for Feng Wuhan, he had chosen a high level of the second refinement. Xia Yongxuan had also chosen a high level of the second refinement. First, they were affected by the destruction of the battle matrix. Then, because of the impact of Xia Yongxuan's grief, the divine forbidden guard had completely lost the initiative. After suppressing the peak of the second refinement with a single slash, Chu Mu attacked with all his strength. He activated the power of the metal spirit and used the worldly cross slash to attack the peak of the second refinement. Even though the people of the Tian clan had outstanding talent and could often fight against experts of other races, a god-forbidden guard at the limit of the second refinement was not enough to contend against a half-step third refinement expert, let alone in a situation where they had lost the initiative. The resplendent worldly cross sword light tore through the void and struck the captain's body. His armor shattered, and the worldly cross sword light cut through his skin without any resistance. The terrifying sword chi that contained all sorts of power rapidly invaded his body and caused a series of destruction. Although the worldly cross slash activated by the metal spirit's power was only at the half step to the third refinement, it was infinitely close to the true third refinement. The incomparably sharp worldly cross sword light tore through the captain's body and tore him to pieces. Xiao Qin turned around and used his sword technique, Chop Dao. Then, he chopped apart another peak second refinement divine guard from head to toe. The instant Chu Mu killed the 2 guards, Feng Wuheng and Xia Yongxuan also killed their opponent. The 8 divine race guards were unable to display much of their strength before they were completely killed. The peerless human experts in the distance were all stunned. They were frightened by Chu Mu and quickly retreated. However, they did not go far away. Instead, they watched from afar because there were still the divine race guards. The divine race was the noblest and most powerful race in the deep blue world. Their purpose in chasing after Chu Mu was also for the divine race's reward. Therefore, they all felt that the 8 divine race guards would be able to kill Chu Mu. This was the result they hoped for the most. This was because they had been scared out of their wits by Chu Mu. Afterwards, they became angry out of shame. However, the situation was different from what they had imagined. It was even the opposite. Not only were the 8 powerful divine race guards unable to do anything to Chu Mu, but they had also died under Chu Mu's sword. All 8 of them had died. Not a single one was left alive. The palaces of the heavenly mountain palace had all collapsed from the battle, turning into ruins. Dozens of corpses of peerless experts had smashed holes in the ruined palaces. Blood flowed out, staining a large area. The bright red color was dazzling. After killing his opponents, Chu Mu did not feel anything wrong with the heart and sword as one. He stopped the sword god's descent secret technique and stopped the blood prison burning sky secret technique. He quickly took out a blood essence pill to replenish his blood essence. Finally, he stopped the sword domain transformation. His aura continued to drop until it finally stopped at the middle stage of the second refinement. "Thank you, brothers," said Chu Mu. "There's no time to lose. Immediately collect the spoils and leave this place," said Feng Wuheng with a smile. Everyone quickly took action and quickly took away the spatial rings of the supreme experts they had killed. This only took a short amount of time. Then they quickly left. After a while, the group of peerless experts in the distance dared to approach. Looking at the corpses of the peerless experts in the palace ruins, they all felt their hair stand on end. A chill rose from the depths of their hearts and spread throughout their bodies. They could not help but shiver. They actually wanted to chase after such a terrifying person. "They killed 8 divine race guards. They won't live for long," said someone with hatred. Someone said hatefully, "I saw it very clearly. The reason why Chu Mu is so strong is because of several secret techniques. However, these secret techniques cannot be sustained for long. Therefore, he will definitely die. Whether he lives or not, it has nothing to do with me," said someone else. "Let's go. I plan to go into seclusion and not come out." News of the battle in the sky above the Sky Mountain region spread quickly. Thus, the world knew that Chu Mu's strength was half a step to the third refinement. Thus, they also knew that Chu Mu was not alone. He had 5 powerful companions. The names of his 5 companions were also widely known. The Heaven Race's God Forbidden Guards were all mobilized and left Cloud Heaven City. Other than Chu Mu, there were 5 more targets they had to kill. The Imperial Court. In the deepest part of the palace, behind an ancient and heavy door, was a mysterious place. Only the Saint Emperor and the 10 kings who had founded the Imperial Court knew about it. The interior of the secret chamber was pitch black. Even a martial saint would not be able to see anything clearly. In fact, even a first refinement expert would be greatly affected. Only those who had reached the second refinement could barely see anything. Even so, they could only see things that were close to them. All of a sudden, the absolute darkness suddenly lit up. A terrifying aura instantly erupted and swept out in all directions. As the darkness retreated, everything in the secret room was finally revealed. The secret room was circular. There were a total of 18 depressions. In each depression there was a person sitting. No, 4 of the depressions were empty. They were the 4 Imperial Guards who had been sent out. Summon the 15-15-16-78 back. The Imperial Guard who sat in the first position was an old man. He said weakly. Immediately, the 14 Imperial Guards all moved. They formed hand seals and hit the altar in the center of the secret room. The ancient altar started to operate. Rays of light flashed and a terrifying aura spread out from the ancient altar. Then, as if the void was torn apart, pieces of flesh and blood floated out from the crack. As soon as they appeared on the altar, they quickly condensed. Not long after, the 4 Imperial Guards appeared. However, their auras were much weaker than usual. After being smashed by Chu Mu many times and being sucked into the spatial crack, they were lucky to be alive. It was normal for their strength to be weakened. It would take a long time for them to recover. However, these Imperial Guards were indeed terrifying. Even the spatial crack was unable to completely destroy them. As expected of the undead Imperial Guards, the 4 Imperial Guards returned. The leader of the Imperial Guards, the old man who looked lifeless, also passed the news to the Battle King. After the Battle King received the news, he was in a bad mood. His usual calmness was nowhere to be seen. His face was gloomy and his killing intent filled the entire palace. No one dared to enter. According to the rules of the imperial court, if the imperial order was not used once and the threat was not eliminated, then the imperial guards were not qualified to be sent out again. Normally, the imperial guards would not be sent out again. Their biggest responsibility was to protect the imperial court. The 5 heavenly generals were dead and the imperial guards had failed. There were no more experts under the Battle King's command. To be able to make 4 second refinement imperial guards return in failure, their strength must be at least at the peak of the second refinement. The Battle King muttered to himself, "It seems that this time, I will have to personally take action." Chapter 1943. In a quiet and secluded valley, trees and grass grew beside the pool. It was lush and verdant. The pool was quiet and without ripples. It was like a mirror that reflected the blue sky and white clouds. It was relaxed and carefree. "This battle is really carefree." Leba laughed loudly. His laughter immediately destroyed the tranquility and spoiled the scenery. However, no one was dissatisfied because they were also excited. With the 6 of them, they had fought against over 100 peerless experts. Such a magnificent feat had never happened before. Most importantly, they had killed almost half of the peerless experts and scared the other half away. Of course, Chu Mu was one of the reasons for this. "I've never killed anyone from the celestial race since I started cultivating. Now that I've killed them, it's no different from us humans." Feng Wuhan smiled. The celestial race was undoubtedly the top race in the deep blue world. Even though there weren't many of them, each of them had outstanding talent and were powerful. Moreover, they were extremely domineering. In the deep blue world, they almost had a dominating status. Therefore, when the cultivators of the various races encountered the celestial race, they wouldn't have any conflicts with them and would usually retreat. After all, the concept of the celestial race being high and mighty had been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people for countless years. Even if there were some people who were unwilling to be oppressed by the celestial race and rose up to resist, the result was that they were killed by the celestial race. Over time, for the sake of their own lives, no one resisted. Chu Mu wasn't a native of the deep blue world. Moreover, his sword Dao was incomparably firm. Anyone who tried to stop him would be cut apart by the sword in his hand. Therefore, no matter what race they were, no matter what background they had, as long as they wanted to kill him, they were all enemies. Enemies had to die. If the celestial race was the heavens, he would break the heavens with his sword. The celestial race has lost 8 forbidden guards in one go. With their domineering nature, they will definitely not let this matter rest. Perhaps they will mobilize their full strength. Kong Lu said. Although he was happy, he was also a little solemn. After all, the celestial race was an extremely powerful race. Even in the era when the Saint Emperor didn't appear, the celestial race's experts were still the strongest in the deep blue world. Ever since the celestial race's people died under my sword, the celestial race has never had the intention of letting this matter rest. Chu Mu said indifferently. This was not the first time he had been chased by the Tian clan. Between him and the Tian clan, there was already an irreconcilable grudge. Among the celestial races, there is no lack of 3rd refinement peerless and 4th refinement peerless. There are even holy venerates, more than one. Xia Yongshuan said with a solemn expression, with the death of the 8 second refined divine guards, the Celestials will definitely send out even stronger divine guards. Our current strength is still insufficient. After the trip to the ice secret domain, everyone's strength had obviously increased. Normally, this kind of improvement would be worth celebrating, but now there were too many strong enemies, and they were even stronger than them. This kind of improvement was far from enough. The 3rd refinement is easier said than done. Feng Wuhan sighed. With his strength at the peak of 2nd refinement, when he said such words, the emotions in the others' hearts became even more obvious. Chu Mu was also helpless. His true cultivation was only at the peak of the Saint realm. If he did not use any secret techniques, his strength could reach the middle stage of the second refinement. If he used all his secret techniques, his strength could reach the half-step to the third refinement. When he used the great heavenly might sword style or the heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style, his attack power could barely reach the early stage of the third refinement. However, it was still not enough. In the end, his own cultivation was still too low. If he could truly reach the level of a peerless expert, he would be even stronger after using his secret technique. It would not be a problem for him to fight against a third refinement peerless expert. However, there was no other way. He chose the path of true intent and not the laws. Chu Mu did not regret this. Apart from the celestial race, the imperial court is also a variable, Chu Mu said. The 4 experts of the imperial court are very strange. They cannot be killed. Perhaps that is the secret power of the imperial court, Xia Yongshuan said. Strength. Lei Ba clenched his fists and said in anger. The strong imperial court and the even stronger celestial race would definitely make one feel despair when facing such a huge force. Brothers, I am unable to help you break through, but I have a secret technique here. If you cultivate it, after using it, you should be able to increase your strength by several times. Chu Mu said. I obtained this secret technique from an enemy. It is called blood hell burning heaven. It burns one's own essence blood in exchange for strength. That's good. Hearing that it was a secret technique obtained from killing an enemy, they did not feel any burden in their hearts. After all, some secret techniques were passed down by the sect and could not be taught to outsiders. Chu Mu taught the 5 of them the blood hell burning heaven. Normally, don't burn more than 30% of your essence blood. After Chu Mu finished, he said, if you burn more than 30%, it might affect your foundation. Brothers, after burning your essence blood, you need to replenish it. I have a secret technique that cannot increase your strength, but it can refine the blood of spirit beasts into essence blood pills to replenish your own. Chu Mu said. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go and hunt spirit beasts. Everyone left the valley and entered the mountain range to hunt spirit beasts for Chu Mu to refine into essence blood pills. There are 240 essence blood pills. Each of us will split 40, so it should be enough. With the 6 of them working together, and since they were specifically dealing with 9-star Saint Realm spirit beasts, it was really simple. Very quickly, they obtained over 200 essence blood pills. With enough essence blood pills, everyone tried to use the blood hell burning heaven secret technique. After all, the blood hell burning heaven secret technique burned one's essence blood to increase their strength. The extent of the increase was closely related to one's essence blood. Sun Jin was a Saint Body Dao practitioner and had evolved into a spiritual body. His essence blood was very powerful. After burning 30% of his essence blood, his strength increased tenfold. Chu Mu also cultivated the Saint Body Dao. Although he had not evolved into a spiritual body, he had reached the peak of the Saint Body Dao. All the blood in his body had been converted into essence blood, and he was very powerful. After burning 30% of his essence blood, his strength could increase by 8 times. Lei Ba and the others tried to use the blood hell burning heaven one by one. After burning 30% of their essence blood, their strength increased by about 5 times. After all, they were not Saint Body Dao practitioners. Each of their saint bodies was only at the 6th or 7th grade. It was normal that the increase was not as good as Chu Mu's. However, with their strength, after using the blood hell burning heaven, their strength increased by 5 times. It was a very obvious increase. If I use the blood hell burning heaven, I can fight against a half-step third refinement cultivator. Feng Wuhan said, however, before we know the secret power of the imperial court, I feel that it is not appropriate to kill our way into the imperial court. Their strength had increased, but in the end they were still not strong enough. They could not fight against an ancient and powerful force like the imperial court. It is difficult to increase one's strength overnight. Kong Lu said, fighting against the imperial court is not something that can be done overnight. We have to hide ourselves and slowly develop and become stronger. That is the only way. You all have no chance. A cold and overbearing voice seemed to descend from the sky. Then, an extremely terrifying aura pressed down like an invisible ancient divine mountain. Everyone felt their vision darken. The terrifying aura pressed down as if the sky was collapsing. It was unparalleled, as if the sky was about to be destroyed. Wang's son, who had the lowest cultivation, trembled and spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale and his aura was weak. Lei Ba and Kong Lu were also trembling. They were only slightly slower than Wang Sunday. They spat out blood and their faces were pale. Xia Yongxuan and Feng Wuhan were very strong. However, under this sudden and terrifying aura, they could not resist it. Their bodies swayed and they groaned. Blood flowed from the corners of their mouth. Their faces were pale and their auras weakened. Only Chu Mu was able to forcibly resist the terrifying aura descending from the sky. Even so, he still felt a bit uncomfortable. Among the 6 of them, if he did not use a secret technique, Chu Mu's strength could only be considered at the intermediate level of the 2nd refinement, which was the same as Wang Sunday. However, his spiritual will was stronger than Feng Wuhan's and half-step 3rd refinement. Even compared to an ordinary beginner level of the 3rd refinement, it was comparable. Therefore, when he was suppressed by this sudden and terrifying aura, he felt his spiritual world tremble. However, he relied on his incomparably strong spiritual will to resist it. Moreover, with the divine sealing compass in his spiritual world, it was more than 10 times more stable. This allowed Chu Mu to completely resist the impact of this terrifying aura. Oh, you can actually withstand an attack from my aura. You are indeed a rare monster. You cannot be left alive. That incomparably tyrannical voice rang out once again, descending from the sky. Following that aura grew even more powerful. Furthermore, it contained an astonishing will, a terrifying will that was unparalleled in 100 battles, a will that could break through the heavens and earth. That was battle intent. The will that was supported by the will to fight suddenly increased. Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongxuan were unable to resist at all. They spat out blood and fell to the ground. The others were unable to resist and directly fainted. Chu Mu's body trembled. It was as if a giant hammer had struck his spiritual world. His entire spiritual world was in turmoil and was about to shatter. The patterns on the divine sealing compass immediately emitted a light and quickly spread out. It passed through his meridians and affected the entire spiritual world. In an instant, it further strengthened the spiritual world. As his body swayed, Chu Mu took a step back. His face was a little pale, but he was not injured. He clenched his hands and a spirit sword appeared in his hand. He directly used a secret technique. Blood prison burns the heavens. Sword domain change. Sword god descends. Facing such a terrifying enemy, Chu Mu did not dare to hold back at all. Spirit of metal, innate spirit of water, and spirit of earth. The 3 essences of the power of heaven and earth were also stimulated. The power of the spirit of metal was injected into the 2 swords. The power of the innate spirit of water wandered between the muscles and bones of his body. The power of the spirit of earth covered his skin. The combination of the innate spirit of water and the spirit of earth, one inside and one outside, gave Chu Mu's body an extremely strong defense. On his body, he was wearing the blood shark armor and the blood shark robe. In total, he had 4 layers of defense. In addition to his pinnacle level 9 saint body, he had 5 layers of defense. It could be said that from the time he had encountered a strong enemy until now, this was the first time Chu Mu had used all the power he could use. Chapter 1944. Unleashing his full strength, Chu Mu raised his head and looked at the sky. Under the terrifying aura, the sky seemed to have turned into darkness. It was difficult to see anything. Chu Mu's eyes flashed with a sharp light. They were like heavenly swords that could shatter the sky. He could vaguely see a figure standing in the dark sky. It was as if it had existed since ancient times. The figure was blurry. Chu Mu suddenly lowered his head and saw a pair of bright eyes. They were like the eyes of a god. They quickly magnified in Chu Mu's eyes and filled his entire world. It made his heart tremble. The aura was overwhelming. It had completely surpassed the level of the second refinement. This was a peerless cultivator of the third refinement. Even though Chu Mu's strength could reach the level of half a step to the third refinement under the continuous accumulation of his strength, and could even threaten the beginner level of the third refinement, he had not truly stepped into the third refinement. Therefore, he did not know how strong a true third refinement cultivator was. Now, he finally understood. Just the suppression of the aura was so terrifying that it almost made him lose the ability to resist. Of course, this was also because this peerless cultivator of the third refinement was even more terrifying. The aura that he exuded was not just the aura of a peerless cultivator of the third refinement. It was also fused with an astonishing will, the battle will. Those with the battle will spent their lives fighting. They fought against the heavens, the earth, and themselves. They fought endlessly and endlessly. They lived by fighting and died by fighting. It was extremely terrifying. Under the battle will, the aura directly multiplied and directly attacked the spiritual world. It was even several times more terrifying. It distorted Chu Mu's perception and made it difficult for him to look straight at it. Could it be that I have to use the sword will? Chu Mu thought to himself. The battle will was a kind of willpower, and the sword will was also a kind of willpower. It was difficult to distinguish between the two. At this time, Chu Mu's sword will had to be suppressed by the eternal sword will because the annihilation sword will had not been completely transformed. Unknowingly, Chu Mu temporarily lost a way to fight against the enemy. In the past, the strong opponents he encountered in battle were not enough for him to use the sword will. He did not feel much. Now it was very obvious. No, it's not the last resort yet. Chu Mu thought in his heart. He was very clearly aware that when facing such a formidable enemy, it wasn't something that could be accomplished by utilizing a small portion of his sword intent. He had to utilize it completely, and the outcome of utilizing his sword intent was extremely obvious. The obliteration sword intent that hadn't transformed completely would collapse because of this, causing all his efforts to be in vain. Therefore, it was fine if he didn't use his sword intent, but once he did, the consequences would be terrible, and all his previous efforts would be wasted. All of the divine desolate sword essence rushed out from his dantian. In his meridians, it was like the water of a great river, surging without stopping. His blood essence surged like lava from a volcano. A tyrannical power constantly emanated from within, surging through his bones and muscles, bringing about an incomparably tyrannical power. Under the unity of energy technique, the power of sword origin and the power of chi and blood merged perfectly. The two swords vibrated incessantly, as if they were excited. Chu Mu, swear your loyalty to me and serve me. You have killed my imperial courts, 5 heavenly generals and battle envoys. The grudge between us is over. Another voice came from the sky. The voice wasn't loud, but it seemed to resound through the heavens and earth. It was extremely domineering and filled with unparalleled battle intent. It struck Chu Mu deep in his heart, shaking his mind. It made Chu Mu unconsciously have the impulse to agree. If Chu Mu's mental will was slightly weaker, he would definitely be affected and unable to resist. However, Chu Mu's mental will was sufficiently strong, and he forcefully broke free from the other party's influence. You are the battle king. It seemed to be a question, but also a confirmation. This was Chu Mu's counterattack. Following his words, a shocking sword chi suddenly surged out from Chu Mu's body. It tore through the heavens and cut through the darkness. It seems like you have already made your choice. It's a pity. It was a pity, but there wasn't the slightest hint of regret. Invincible finger, earth-splitting! With a low shout, the figure in the sky suddenly stretched out a finger, locking on to Chu Mu from afar, and pointed it downwards. A huge finger condensed in the air, and instantly pointed downwards. The tip of the finger rapidly enlarged in Chu Mu's eyes. The fingerprints on the finger were clearly visible, as if they contained some kind of unique mystery. A shocking battle intent gathered on the finger, releasing a terrifying pressure. It could be seen that the void was unable to withstand the power of that huge finger. Inch by inch, pitch-black cracks appeared and spread out. It was like a piece of white paper being cut by a blunt knife. The power of that finger was so tyrannical. Before it even landed, Chu Mu already felt as if he was an ant being crushed. Inch by inch cracks appeared on the ground beneath his feet and rapidly spread out. In the blink of an eye, the cracks had spread hundreds of meters away. Chu Mu tried his best to widen his eyes, mobilizing all the power in his body. Blue veins bulged on his arms, containing an incomparably terrifying power. He brandished his two swords, crossing them, as if he could cut through all obstacles. He only felt that the pressure above him had loosened a little. He immediately soared into the sky, erupting with all his strength and brandishing his two swords. Rays of sword light, like a torrential downpour, blasted towards the sky. Cloud-piercing Dao beheading Zhentian, displaying various sword moves. Heaven and earth cross/. Sword light was extremely intense. Chu Mu didn't dare to let that huge finger fall. The terrifying power let him know that once the huge finger fell, the earth would shatter, and Kong Lu and the other four wouldn't be able to survive. Therefore, he could only face it head-on, brandishing his sword. Rays of sword light tore through the sky, slashing towards the huge finger. When they collided with the huge finger, the rays of sword light were all shattered. However, under the many rays of sword light, Chu Mu had unleashed all his strength. They were even more tyrannical than ordinary half-step third refinement, causing a certain degree of damage to the huge finger. 6 paths sword style. 6 pitch-black vortexes were arranged in a straight line, each of them collapsing under the huge finger. Every time a pitch-black vortex was destroyed, it would absorb a little of the huge finger's power. After all 6 vortexes were destroyed, the lines on the huge finger became blurry. Heaven and earth cross/. The incomparably brilliant heaven and earth cross sword light shot out, as if it was branded in the void. It was extremely dazzling, and its power was close to the initial third refinement. It imprinted on the huge finger, leaving behind a faint cross mark, causing the huge finger to pause slightly. Immediately, the heaven and earth cross sword light shattered inch by inch, dissipating into rays of light, and the fingerprint on it became even more blurry. At this moment, the huge finger had already fallen, and it was only a few meters away from Chu Mu. A terrifying aura and fighting spirit directly attacked Chu Mu's body and mind, making him feel that he couldn't resist. This was the power of the finger after its power had been continuously weakened by his sword moves. If it hadn't been weakened, how tyrannical would the power of the huge finger be? The invincible finger was indeed worthy of its name. 2 swords crossed, Chu Mu once again displayed the heaven and earth cross/, erupting with all his power. Time and space seemed to have stopped at this moment, and only Chu Mu was holding the swords with both hands, crossing them, blocking the attack of the huge finger. This was only for a moment, but Chu Mu's body trembled violently. An incomparably terrifying power bombarded the 2 swords from the huge finger, causing them to tremble and emit creaking sounds as if they couldn't bear the heavy burden. Immediately after, the terrifying power passed through the 2 swords, blasting into Chu Mu's arms, and then through his arms, blasting into his body. The power was indescribable. After it blasted into his body, it raged wildly, as if it could tear everything apart. It wanted to tear Chu Mu's body into pieces. The invincible finger had 3 fingers. The first finger, Earth Split, had the power to split the earth and was extremely terrifying. Chu Mu's body seemed to have become the earth, and was about to be torn apart. Blood prison burns the heavens, 40% of my blood essence burn. Chu Mu instantly burned another 10% of his blood essence, and his strength rose once again. The tyrannical power in his body strengthened his body, resisting the impact of the earth split. The power of that finger was extremely tyrannical. Although Chu Mu could barely resist it, he was still injured. Many cracks appeared on his body, and blood flowed out. His entire body fell from the sky like a meteorite, crashing into the ground. With a bang, Chu Mu's body blasted a huge hole in the ground. In the center of the hole, there was a small pitch-black hole. Chu Mu's body smashed into the hole, sinking dozens of meters into the ground. One finger, just one finger. Chu Mu, whose strength was comparable to a half step to the third refinement, couldn't resist at all. Dozens of meters underground, Chu Mu was on the verge of death. His blood shark robe and blood shark armor were completely shattered, and his wounds were torn apart. Blood flowed out continuously, but powerful vitality continued to spread out. The vitality of the wood avatar also surged out continuously, rapidly healing his injuries. Chu Mu's vitality was already extremely strong, and could even be compared to those who had just formed the spiritual body. With the addition of the vitality of the wood avatar, his injuries healed rapidly, and his aura recovered rapidly. However, the power of that finger was too terrifying. Chu Mu estimated that even an expert at the initial third refinement would find it difficult to resist, let alone him. He had never expected the warlord of the imperial court to be so powerful. Moreover, among the 10 kings of the imperial court, the warlord's strength wasn't even in the top 3. How terrifying was that? In Chu Mu's heart, a sliver of confusion involuntarily appeared. Was it wrong to go against the imperial court? Killing the envoys of the imperial court, killing the 5 generals of the imperial court, and even forcing the secret forces of the imperial court to retreat. All of this gave Chu Mu great confidence. However, a warlord had attacked. With just one finger, he couldn't resist at all. Such an opponent was so powerful, so terrifyingly powerful. How could he resist? If he couldn't resist such a strong opponent, then going against the imperial court would be a joke, a huge joke. With just one attack, his 5 companions lost their ability to resist and fainted. Although he was slightly better off, he wasn't a match for the warlord at all. They were on 2 completely different levels. Thinking about himself, his talent was outstanding, his perception was outstanding, and his future was limitless. However, what he walked on was the Tao of true intent. He didn't have a suitable cultivation technique for him to temper his true intent and truly step into the realm of a peerless expert. If he didn't step into the realm of a peerless expert, it would be very difficult for him to raise his strength. Chapter 1945. The crater was hundreds of meters wide, and countless cracks spread out for thousands of meters. The mountain rocks were all shattered, and in the center of the crater, there was a pitch-black crater that was only a meter wide. It was dozens of meters deep. Inside the crater, a weak aura gradually grew stronger. However, the aura was fluctuating, indicating that the owner of the aura was in a state of shock. Confusion filled Chu Mu's eyes. For a moment, he lost his will to fight. All along, no matter how difficult the situation was, Chu Mu had never given up. However, this time, the enemy was too strong. It was beyond his imagination. It was not only the Battle King alone. There were other kings who were even stronger than the Battle King. Chu Mu did not think that the other kings of the imperial court would not deal with him after he killed the Battle King. Therefore, he was facing a huge mountain, a mountain that was almost impossible to climb. If his cultivation could increase again, he would have enough confidence. Unfortunately, his cultivation had already reached its limit. Unless he had enough time, dozens of years, or even hundreds of years, he would be able to create a cultivation technique that could refine his true intent. Only then would he be able to step into the ranks of the peerless expert. Only then would he be able to continuously increase his strength and become even stronger. Relying on the secret technique to increase one's strength was not permanent. It could only last for a short period of time. Once the time was up or the power of the secret technique was used up, one's strength would return to its original level. His own cultivation would not be able to increase anymore. The enemy was too strong. It was like an insurmountable mountain. Despair filled his heart. Maybe I should give up now. A voice rang out in his heart. Chu Mu almost obeyed this voice and gave up resisting, and gave up struggling. This was because this was an extremely difficult path, a path that was practically impossible to walk down. Maybe giving up was the best choice. However, he did not know why, but there was still a sense of unwillingness in his heart. I, Chu Mu, was a sword arts master in my past life. I held a sword in my hand and traveled thousands of miles. No matter what kind of predicament I encountered, I never gave up. I used the sword in my hand to break through everything. I reincarnated into ancient sword continent and faced countless difficulties. I never gave up. Along the way, I pulled out my sword and advanced. I encountered many powerful enemies whose cultivation and strength surpassed mine, but I never thought of giving up. I worked hard to catch up, constantly improving, constantly strengthening myself. Ancient sword continent. Primeval world. Ancient god world. Deep blue world. I've been moving forward, stepping into one world after another, encountering one powerful enemy after another, encountering one difficulty after another. Could it be that I have to give up here? No, I cannot give up. My heart, my sword, I will not give up. I want to reach the pinnacle of the sword Tao and reach the other shore of the sword Tao. My path will not end here. Faith, a strong faith, was awakened from the bottom of his heart. It was an unyielding spirit that came from the depths of his soul. It was surging like a volcano erupting. His aura rapidly strengthened and stabilized. Moreover, it seemed to be more condensed. It was as if it had become purer after being tempered thousands of times. His injuries also seemed to be healing faster. Most importantly, Chu Mu felt that under the firm faith after shattering his confusion, the transformation of his sword intent seemed to be accelerating. Sword intent was a kind of will. It belonged to the spiritual level. Faith was also a spiritual level power. They were connected to a certain extent. When a faith was strong to a certain extent, it could affect one's own will. The annihilation sword intent was accelerating its transformation. It was more than 10 times faster than usual. Suddenly, a glimmer of hope appeared in his heart. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to fight against the Battle King. The difference between the half-third refinement and the true third refinement was too obvious. However, if he was able to use the sword intent, his strength would definitely increase once again. Moreover, it would not be a slight increase, but a huge increase. The reason was because the sword intent was the main element of the sword art. With the sword intent, all of his strength would have a backbone. His strength would definitely increase by 10 times, or even more. At that time, he might have the strength to fight against a peerless third refinement expert. However, in the past, the transformation of the sword intent had been carried out naturally. The speed was neither fast nor slow. If it was at a normal speed, it would take some time for the transformation to be complete. But now, the transformation speed had suddenly increased by more than 10 times. Moreover, under the influence of his firm belief, it was still increasing. 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, the higher the increase, the greater the hope Chu Mu felt. The greater the hope, in turn, would affect the budding conviction, making it more and more resolute. The more resolute the conviction, the more it could affect the transformation of the sword intent, creating a virtuous cycle. 100 times. The transformation speed of sword intent had directly increased by more than 100 times. The transformation speed shocked Chu Mu. However, this was not the limit. It was still increasing. 1,000 times. With every breath, Chu Mu could feel his sword intent transforming and gradually perfecting. This transformation existed in his spiritual world. The outside world could not sense it. From the moment Chu Mu was struck down and fell into the pit, to when he was confused, to when he shattered his confusion and strengthened his faith, the transformation speed of sword intent had increased by 1,000 times. This process seemed to have taken a long time, but in reality, it had only been completed in a short breath. The person in the sky did not seem to be in a hurry to kill Chu Mu. Therefore, when he struck Chu Mu down, he did not immediately chase after him. If he immediately chased after him and struck out with another finger, Chu Mu would definitely die. Of course, if he really struck out with another finger, Chu Mu would not just sit there and wait for death. He still had a trump card, and that was the last chance of the Sword Sect Spirit Seal to summon Bai Ling. In the past, Chu Mu had always felt that Bai Ling was extremely likely to be a great emperor or holy king. However, after learning that the so-called Holy Sovereign was only a supreme expert who had undergone the fifth refinement and not a holy king, he began to doubt his previous thoughts. Perhaps Senior Bai Ling was very powerful, but he was not a holy king. He was a supreme expert. As for what level he was at, that was not something he knew. Chu Mu really did not know whether Senior Bai Ling was a supreme expert or a holy king. If he was a holy king, he would have to be careful when summoning him, because the Grand Tao of this era could no longer withstand a holy king's attack. However, if he really encountered a situation where he could not resist at all, where he would definitely die, Chu Mu would have no choice but to summon him. At that time, he could only resign himself to fate. Fortunately, the Battle King had no intention of chasing after him. Chu Mu also did not know what the Battle King was thinking, but as long as he had time, it would be beneficial to him. Once he had enough time, his sword intent would finish transforming and he would be able to use it. Faster, faster, Chu Mu thought to himself. The second breath passed, and the speed of the sword intent's transformation was still increasing, as if there was no limit. Faith brought hope, and hope strengthened faith. This allowed Chu Mu to gain a deeper understanding of the power of faith. The place where he landed was quite a distance away from where Kong Lu and the others had fainted, so they were not too affected. The figure stood in the sky. His eyes seemed to be able to see through the earth. He can actually resist the invincible finger, the Battle King said to himself. He was extremely shocked. Even though I'm only a clone, and I can't use the full power of the invincible finger, an ordinary third refinement initial stage cultivator would die under my finger. A mere half-step third refinement initial stage cultivator can resist it without dying. Indeed, he is a rare monster. In the current world, no one can compare to him in terms of talent. Unfortunately, you shouldn't have provoked me. It turned out that this was only a clone of the Battle King. After using the invincible finger, the clone had used up a lot of energy. It was almost empty, so it could not launch a second attack. It was currently absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth to replenish its energy. It was precisely because of this that it did not immediately launch a second attack. He also had enough confidence. Although that finger attack did not kill his opponent, it had injured him. It was a serious injury, and it would be very difficult for him to recover. Even if he could recover, so what? His strength would soon be fully recovered. When that time came, he could unleash an even more tyrannical finger attack. It would be enough to kill Chu Mu and turn him into ashes. This was the confidence of the Battle King, one of the 10 kings of the imperial dynasty. His real body would not appear easily. The clouds in the sky surged. This was a scene formed by the yuan qi of heaven and earth. The Battle King's clone was recovering his strength, and Chu Mu was also recovering from his injuries. At the same time, he was also accelerating the transformation of his sword intent. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, very quickly 10 breaths passed. The violent yuan qi of heaven and earth in the sky calmed down instantly. Because it was being absorbed from afar, it was not being absorbed. It instantly calmed down and flowed back like a hurricane, rushing in all directions. Die. After the Battle King's clone recovered his strength, he pointed out a finger attack. This finger attack was not the invincible finger. It was just an ordinary finger attack, but it contained a shocking amount of power. This was because the Battle King's clone had reached the middle stage of the third refinement initial stage. He believed that even if Chu Mu's injuries were mostly healed within these 10 breaths, he would still not be able to resist this attack. The terrifying finger attack was like a sword, piercing through the air. It was as if nothing could resist the power of this finger attack. It was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the finger attack landed on the 10-meter deep crater. At the same time, a terrifying wave of qi exploded from the crater. That was the qi of sword intent. It was extremely sharp, as if the heaven and earth were eternal. Obviously, it was an extremely high-level sword intent. Immediately after, a silhouette dashed out of the crater. His speed was extremely fast, and he transformed into an incomparably sharp sword light. Before the Battle King's clone could react, his sword had already arrived. Chapter 1946. Fast, too fast. The sword light was like a shooting star that streaked across the sky, but also like an aurora that pierced through the void. It was indescribable. Wherever the sword light passed, it left a straight trace in the void. The trace still emitted an astonishing aura fluctuation. Its sharpness was unparalleled, as if it could exist for eternity. This was the power of the eternal sword will. From the moment Chu Mu unleashed all his power to the moment he was struck down by the Battle King's avatar and blasted dozens of meters into the ground, the entire process only took a few breaths. Therefore, the power of his secret technique was not used up much. It could still last for quite some time. Within the dozens of meters deep pit, Chu Mu's belief had completed a transformation. The attack of confusion was like an inner demon. It broke through the confusion and shattered the inner demon. His spiritual will was further enhanced. His spiritual world was several times more stable. His belief was firmer. Under the influence of his belief, his sword will had also completed its transformation. However, the annihilation sword will that had just completed its transformation still needed a little more time before it could fully integrate into the sword spirit. Therefore, before that, Chu Mu had used the eternal sword will. The eternal sword will was one of the most advanced sword wills. It possessed the power of eternity. In terms of destructive power, although it was not outstanding, it was actually hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than ordinary sword wills. Therefore, with Chu Mu's use of various secret techniques to reach the half-step third refinement, after using the eternal sword intent, the power of his sword abruptly rose sharply, directly skipping the initial third refinement stage and reaching the middle third refinement stage. This kind of power shocked Chu Mu. The power of his sword increased by 100 times when he used the eternal sword will. It had a huge impact. Moreover, when he used the eternal sword will, the other forces seemed to have found their backbone and were highly controlled. This allowed their potential to be fully unleashed and transformed into power, increasing their power by 10 times. Such a huge increase, 1,000 times, caused Chu Mu's strength to skyrocket. From barely entering the third refinement, he directly reached the middle stage of the third refinement. Although he could only be considered to have entered the middle stage of the third refinement, he was still extremely powerful. With the help of the eternal sword will, Chu Mu's speed instantly exploded and reached the third refinement level. However, his speed was slightly slower and could only reach the initial third refinement level. The Battle King's avatar was shocked. Before he could say anything else, Chu Mu's sword light had already reached him. The Battle King's avatar felt a great threat and reacted immediately. Dodging, attacking with his finger, he continued to attack. Beams of powerful finger light pierced through the void like swords, shooting towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu swung his sword light, and under the control of the eternal sword will, he shattered the finger lights one by one. Then, the sword light spun and instantly condensed into one ray. Like an aurora, it pierced through the sky and pierced towards the warlord's avatar. Break! The Battle King's avatar pointed out again. His finger light shone brightly and shattered Chu Mu's sword light. His 10 fingers continuously flicked, and countless finger lights attacked from all directions like a storm. As the sword light was waved, it was like a line in the sky, shattering all the finger lights. Clouds and mist filled the air as the sword light pierced through the clouds. With a poochie sound, the extremely condensed and silent sword light hit the Battle King's avatar's body. However, strangely, no blood flowed out. This avatar was formed by the Battle King's power. It didn't have flesh and blood, so naturally, it wouldn't be injured. However, the Battle King's avatar was extremely furious. He was a third refinement peerless cultivator. Even though it was just a clone, he still had the strength of a middle third refinement cultivator. Yet, he had been hit by a junior who was countless years younger than him. Hitting the Battle King with one sword gave Chu Mu great confidence. The shadow in his heart from being hit by that finger had completely disappeared. Battle King, I'll kill you first, then destroy the Imperial dynasty. Chu Mu shouted and slashed out again. His sword cut through everything in the world. The void simply couldn't stop Chu Mu's sword at all. It was as weak as tofu, directly sliced apart. The shocking sword light wrapped in a pitch-black aura instantly slashed down. Watch how I kill you with one finger. The Battle King's avatar was so angry that he laughed. Facing Chu Mu's powerful sword, he didn't have any intention of dodging. Instead, he pointed out a finger and said, "Invincible finger, heavens fall." The invincible finger had 3 fingers. The first finger was Earthcrack, and the second finger was Heaven's Fall. Its power was much stronger than Earthcrack. As the finger shot out, it was as if the power of the entire sky was sucked in and merged into that finger. In front of Chu Mu's eyes, the sky retreated and the earth disappeared. The entire world seemed to have retreated into darkness, turning into nothingness. Only that finger was rapidly enlarging in front of him, filling his eyes. That finger strike was capable of shattering the heavens and shattering the sky. This finger used up all of the Battle King's avatar's strength. After using it, the Battle King's avatar became blurry, like a candle in the wind, about to disappear. However, he quickly absorbed the yuan qi of heaven and earth to replenish his energy. His body slowly solidified. The power of this finger could shake one's mind, causing one to lose the chance to defend. If one was hit, it would shatter just like the sky. If it was before, Chu Mu wouldn't have been able to defend at all. But now, after experiencing the torture of his soul, he had broken through his confusion and destroyed his inner demons. His will was sharpened and his faith was strengthened. He wasn't affected at all. Heaven and Earth cross slash. The Heaven and Earth cross slash that was infused with the eternal sword intent was more than 1,000 times stronger. The indescribable sword light was so bright that it looked like the sun had turned into a cross. In addition to the power of the eternal sword intent, the Heaven and Earth cross sword light was like a mark in the sky. The Heaven's Fall finger and the Heaven and Earth cross slash clashed instantly. The Heaven and Earth seemed to have been destroyed. The world seemed to have disappeared without a sound. The color was black and white, then it turned gray. At the place where the Heaven and Earth cross slash and the Heaven's Bane finger collided, no sound was heard. Instead, a black hole appeared. It was the result of the space being unable to withstand the power of the 2 attacks. The black hole produced a terrifying suction force that crazily devoured everything in its surroundings. The light that was shattered by the 2 attacks was all absorbed by the black hole. It didn't affect the surroundings at all. However, the aura made Chu Mu and the Battle King's avatar's face change. It was obviously very terrifying. It seemed like 1,000 years had passed, but it was also just a moment. The black hole seemed to have devoured enough energy and closed up again. Chu-Mu didn't stop. He held his sword and attacked the Battle King's avatar. At this moment, the Battle King's avatar had used up all of his energy after using the Heaven's Bane finger. He hadn't fully recovered yet. Facing Chu-Mu's two swords, he could only dodge continuously in an attempt to buy some time for his energy to recover. However, in front of Chu-Mu's heart sword as one, all dodging was useless. The two swords were berserk, and each strike was fatal. Sword light was everywhere, covering all directions and covering everything. The Battle King's avatar, who hadn't fully recovered his energy, was in a very sorry state. His body was constantly hit by the sword. Although he wasn't made of flesh and blood and wouldn't bleed, it would cause the energy in his body to dissipate and greatly delay the recovery of his energy. In the blink of an eye, Chu-Mu had stabbed out thousands of times. At least 1/10 of them had hit the Battle King's avatar. The result of hundreds of swords hitting the Battle King's avatar was undoubtedly terrifying. The energy that had just recovered dissipated once again, and the Battle King's avatar became weak. Although Chu-Mu wasn't sure why the Battle King was like this, he could sense that the Battle King's aura was constantly weakening. He took the opportunity to use the Zhen Tian sword style. After such a long time, Chu-Mu's attainments in the Heart's sword as one had deepened. He had also integrated the Heart's sword style into various sword styles, except for the Great Heaven's Might sword style and the Heavenly Slaughter and Earthly Calamity sword style, as well as the newly comprehended Eternal sword style. Zhen Tian's sword style was extremely violent. It was controlled by the Eternal sword intent, integrated with the sword intent and tremor intent, integrated with the Divine Wilderness sword essence, integrated with the Sage physique, integrated with the Blood Prison Heaven burning force, integrated with the Sword Domain Transformation Force, integrated with the second stage of the Sword God's Descent Secret Technique, integrated with the Metal Spirit, and executed with the Eternal Spiritual Sword. The Eternal Sword intent was enhanced by the Eternal Spiritual Sword, and the Life Sword Spirit's power was also integrated into it, causing its power to constantly increase until it reached a terrifying level. The sword lashed out with unparalleled power. The Battle King's avatar's energy was severely weakened, and he couldn't resist at all. He was directly hit by the sword, and he could only feel the terrifying power vibrating and spreading throughout his body. With a bang, the Battle King's avatar's body was torn into pieces, and it was continuously attacked by the terrifying power, collapsing into pieces. A spiritual light instantly shot out from the shattered body, flying into the distance at an extremely fast speed. Chu-Mu saw the silver light spiritual sword quickly stabbing out, and a cold silver light like a meteor piercing the moon struck the Battle King's avatar's avatar, causing a mournful scream to ring out. However, this sword did not shatter the Battle King's avatar's avatar, but the Battle King's avatar's avatar had dimmed a lot. Chu-Mu, in a few days, my true body will personally come and kill you. The Battle King's avatar's avatar quickly escaped, leaving behind a threat. The Battle King's avatar's avatar was too fast, and Chu-Mu couldn't chase after it, so he could only give up. However, he didn't stop the power of the secret technique, and maintained the tyrannical aura of the middle third refinement, spreading out in all directions and suppressing the four Cs. So it's just a Battle King's avatar. Chu-Mu thought to himself as he stared in the direction where the Battle King's avatar had disappeared. His fighting spirit was surging, and at the same time, he was extremely shocked. Just a Battle King's avatar had the strength of the middle third refinement, then what about the Battle King's true body? The upper third refinement? Or the peak of the third refinement? After about 10 breaths of time, Chu-Mu stopped the secret techniques one by one and withdrew the Eternal Sword Will. His aura continued to fall, and in the end, it returned to the middle third refinement. As soon as he stopped the secret techniques, Chu-Mu immediately felt weak. He hurriedly took out various pills and consumed them to replenish the consumption of his essence blood, sword origin, and spiritual power. As he recovered his strength, Chu Mu landed where Feng Wuhan and the other four were unconscious, waking them up one by one. Chapter 1947. The spiritual light quickly returned to the imperial court and entered the Battle King's forehead. The Battle King's body trembled as he opened his eyes. A trace of fierceness and viciousness flashed through his eyes. His pale face turned ferocious before returning to normal. That speck of spiritual light was the spiritual light he had split off from his origin spirit. It contained a portion of his origin spirit's power and consciousness. Because of that, the Battle King knew everything that had happened after the spiritual light returned. It was because he knew that his expression was so ugly. Originally, he had split off a bit of his Yuan spirit's spiritual light to control his energy clone to kill Chu Mu. With his strength of the third refinement, he could easily kill Chu Mu and the others. He didn't expect that the situation would be out of his control and an unforeseen event would occur. That Chu Mu not only didn't die from his earth-splitting finger, but instead possessed an even more terrifying strength, enough to contend against his energy doppelganger. As for the energy doppelganger's energy doppelganger, it was ultimately defeated. Furthermore, when his bit of divine light left his body, it was stabbed by Chu Mu's sword. Although it wasn't destroyed, it was still wounded. After the spiritual light was injured, his Yuan spirit would be affected as well. He would need a period of time to recover. Otherwise, there would be bad consequences. What the Battle King couldn't understand was why Chu Mu, whose strength had reached the half-step third refinement after using various secret techniques, was able to explode with strength comparable to the middle stage third refinement after being wounded. Was it another secret technique? However, in this world, what kind of secret technique could increase someone's strength from the half-step third refinement to the third refinement? If there is such a secret technique, I must obtain it. The Battle King said in a low voice. If he obtained it and used it at a critical moment, his strength might be able to reach the peak of the third refinement, or even the fourth refinement. Thinking of this, the Battle King's heart burned with passion. Chu Mu, wait until I recover. My original body will personally come and capture you alive. The Battle King thought to himself. A sharp light shot out from his eyes. The side effects of using such a secret technique must be great. It won't be easy to recover. Unbeknownst to the Battle King, Chu Mu's strength had soared from the half-third refinement to the intermediate third refinement not because of some earth-shattering secret technique, but because of the eternal sword intent. Sword intents were divided into ordinary attributes and high and low levels. The difference between the high and low levels was 10 times or even dozens of times. Ordinary low-level sword intents did not increase one's strength significantly. At most, it would increase one's strength by 2 or 3 times. However, sword intents were more powerful than ordinary sword intent. Naturally, the increase in strength would be more obvious. Chu Mu's sword intents were at the highest level. Moreover, his eternal power was also one of the most advanced attribute. The combination of the two highest levels created an even more powerful existence. Moreover, sword cultivators should focus on sword intent. They should control the strength in their body and perform sword technique. A sword technique without sword intent was like a machine without a core, and its power could not be unleashed to the extreme. Therefore, when using the eternal sword intent, Chu Mu's strength skyrocketed by 1,000 times, directly skipping the half-step third refinement, the initial stage third refinement, the peak of the initial stage third refinement, and reaching the middle stage third refinement. If the Battle King knew that it was his finger that had caused Chu Mu's belief to transform and accelerated the transformation of his sword intent, who knew if he would be annoyed? You said that was the Battle King's clone? Feng Wuhan and the others stared at Chu Mu with wide eyes. It was just a clone, but its power was enough to make them vomit blood and faint. If the real body was here, how terrifying would it be? A single aura would be enough to kill them. Although it's just a clone, it has the strength of the intermediate third refinement, said Chumu. Intermediate third refinement. Hearing this, everyone was stunned at first, then they smiled bitterly. The strongest among the 5 of them was only Feng Wuhan, who was at the peak of the second refinement. Perhaps if he used all his strength, he could barely be considered a half-third refinement. However, there was still a huge gap between a half-third refinement and a real third refinement, not to mention the intermediate third refinement. That's not right. If the Battle King's clone has the strength of the intermediate third refinement, why are we still alive? Wang Sun's mind worked quickly, and his eyes widened as he exclaimed. Could it be that he was kind enough to let us go? Lei Ba rarely cracked a joke, but it was a cold one. How could the Battle King let them go? I killed his clone, said Chumu. Killed him? You killed the intermediate third refinement clone of the Battle King. Everyone screamed. They couldn't help but scream, and they couldn't help but be shocked. They had fought side by side with Chumu before, so they knew very well how strong he was. If he could kill the Battle King's clone, didn't that mean that Chumu's strength had also reached the third refinement? In the past, due to some reasons, I couldn't use my sword intent. This time, I was lucky enough to survive the Battle King's clone's attack. It was a blessing in disguise, and I can use my sword intent again, so my strength increased greatly. Chumu explained simply. Everyone's eyes widened. They felt as if they were listening to a heavenly book. Unable to use his sword intent, his strength was insufficient. But now, not only did he survive the Battle King's clone's attack, he could use his sword intent again, and his strength increased from the half-third refinement to the third refinement. Being able to kill the Battle King's clone, who had the strength of the intermediate third refinement, felt like a legend. The increase in sword intent, is it really that great? Lei Ba mumbled. He was a lightning cultivator, and he didn't have sword intent. Therefore, he wasn't very clear about the power of sword intent. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be that great, but, Feng Wuhan said, looking at Xia Yongxuan. Both of them were sword cultivators, and extraordinary ones at that, so they knew better. Unless it's an extremely high-level sword intent, Xia Yongxuan said. Feng Wuhan's sword intent wasn't low. It was a heaven-level sword intent, and it was the wind sword intent. Xia Yongxuan's sword intent was also a heaven-level sword intent, the Great Sorrow sword intent. Their sword intents greatly increased their swordsmanship, making them even more powerful. But even so, their sword intents didn't increase their strength as much as Chumu's. Could it be that Chumu's sword intent had surpassed the heaven level, and was a god-level sword intent? Moreover, it was the best of the god-level sword intents? Chumu, can you release your sword intent? Feng Wuhan asked seriously, his tone somewhat pleading. Xia Yongxuan also looked at Chumu with a hopeful gaze. This wasn't a big deal, so Chumu naturally wouldn't refuse. He released his eternal sword intent. An immortal, everlasting, and eternal aura suddenly spread out. Within it, there was an extreme sharpness that pierced through the underworld and tore the sky apart. It was incomparable. It's an elemental sword intent, and it's the best one, Feng Wuhan exclaimed. This sword intent is so strong. I've never felt it in my life. Xia Yongxuan also sighed. His tone seemed even more lonely. So you haven't used your full strength before. Lei Ba's eyes widened as he stared straight at Chumu. Tell me honestly, how much strength are you hiding? What he said was actually correct. If he couldn't use his sword intent, it meant that Chumu hadn't used his full strength. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't want to use his full strength at that time, but there was no other way. Now it was different. I have 2 sword intents that belong to the same level, but the other one has just completed its transformation, so I can't use it yet. Chumu said. Dual sword intents. And they're of the same level. Everyone was even more shocked. However, even if it was dual sword intents, it could only make the sword intent more versatile. It couldn't let the power of the two sword intents overlap, so it didn't increase one's strength. It was more of a potential in the way of the sword. Therefore, they didn't ask about the other sword intent in detail. Otherwise, if they knew that it was a purely destructive sword intent, and although it was of the same level as the eternal sword intent, it was much more destructive, who knew how shocked they would be. After a while, everyone calmed down. However, the way they looked at Chu Mu was a little different from before. After all, even if Chu Mu had displayed the strength of a half-step to the third refinement in the past, his strength was still at the second refinement. However, now that he had defeated the Battle King's clone, he was at least at the third refinement. It was a different level. At the end of the day, it's all about strength. We're still too weak. If we had the strength of the third refinement, even if it's just the initial third refinement, we wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Is there any way to increase our strength faster? Leiba asked. We've already entered the ice secret territory and refined the frigid jade essence. Even if we get the frigid jade essence again, it won't increase our strength to the third refinement. Kong Lu said. The only thing we can do now is to go there. Xia Yongxuan said, as if he had made up his mind. Where is that? Leiba asked quickly. At this time, he would be very enthusiastic about anything that could increase his strength. The others also looked at Xia Yongxuan. The Great Demon Burial Abyss. Xia Yongxuan said these words word by word. Every word contained an unknown power that made everyone's hearts beat faster and their blood flow seemed to be reversed. Feng Wuhan and the others' faces were solemn. Only Chu Mu was not affected because Chu Mu had no idea what the Great Demon Burial Abyss was. He just felt that it was not a simple place. You've been there before? I've been there before, Xia Yongxuan said. He seemed to have thought of something and the sadness in his eyes became more obvious. The Great Demon Burial Abyss is rumored to be extremely terrifying, but it also has great opportunities. Let's go there and try our luck. If we can obtain great opportunities, our strength will definitely increase again. At that time, we will have more confidence to fight against the Imperial dynasty. Everyone said resolutely. Originally, their will to become stronger was not that firm. However, after the Battle King's clone suppression, their will was strengthened by 100 times. Chapter 1948. In the Deep Blue World, in the ancient era, sage emperors were revered. Experts were everywhere. That was a glorious era, an era of prosperity, an era that countless people yearned for. In that era, the sage emperors had opened up their own territories. They ruled over their own territories, dividing the Deep Blue World from the outside. In that era, experts were born in large numbers. In order to fight over opportunities, resources, and strength, there were endless battles. Between individuals, between factions, and even between territories, there were endless battles. There were countless casualties. In the ancient era, there was a sage emperor called the Devil Emperor. He was the leader of the Devil Path. There was another sage emperor called the Tao Emperor. He was the leader of the Righteous Path. The Righteous Path and Devil Path were led by the Tao Emperor and Devil Emperor to a decisive battle between the Righteous Path and Devil Path. That battle caused the heavens and the earth to collapse. Numerous saint exalts and countless experts perished, causing blood to form rivers and corpses to form mountains. The battle between the Tao Emperor and Devil Emperor even caused the sky to collapse and black holes to appear. Both of them were at the peak of saint emperors, and they were invincible. They used all their strength and abilities to battle for 10 days and 10 nights. The ground had collapsed countless times, and they'd even destroyed 2 territories. The Tao Emperor and Devil Emperor were too powerful. After 10 days and 10 nights of continuous fighting, not only did they cause destruction to the earth, but they also affected the operation of the heavenly Daos of the Deep Blue World. Worried that if they continued fighting, the heavenly Daos of the Deep Blue World would collapse, The Tao Emperor ignited his own Yuan spirit and unleashed an unprecedented attack on the Devil Emperor. That attack had completely destroyed the two domains, and killed the Devil Emperor, causing them to sink down into the depths of the abyss. The Devil Emperor's death caused the morale of the Devil Path's experts to plummet. The Righteous Path's morale soared, and they killed even more Devil Path experts. That battle was known as the Battle of Devil Fall. Because countless Devil Path experts had died in that battle, the Devil Path's inheritance had been severed. Although a portion of it had been passed down in the future, the Righteous Path had flourished. They hunted down Devil Path cultivators everywhere. They were like rats on the street, and they completely declined. As time passed, the Devil Path gradually faded from people's sight. In the later generations, although there were people who obtained some demonic cultivation methods, there were not many of them. Moreover, due to the changes of time, the concept of the Righteous Path and the demonic path became blurred. Therefore, no one looked into it anymore. During the Great War between the righteous and demonic paths, the two great regions had sunk, which was equivalent to being buried with the Devil Emperor. Countless demonic path experts had also lost their lives. Therefore, the abyss that appeared was named the Great Devil Burial Abyss. In the Demon Burial Abyss, apart from the deaths of countless demon path experts, there were also many righteous path experts who had fallen. Therefore, there were countless opportunities in the Demon Burial Abyss. If one could obtain them, one's strength would increase. Of course, with opportunities came terrifying dangers. The battle between the Tao Emperor and Devil Emperor affected the operation of the Heaven Tao. Along with the passage of time, the Heaven Tao gradually weakened, and it became more and more difficult for it to support the strength of the Sage Emperors. Up until the current era, the Sage Emperors had no choice but to enter into closed-door cultivation so as to avoid affecting the operation of the Heaven Tao and causing the world to collapse. It was also because of the weakening of the Heaven Tao that the strength of the Sage Emperors was clearly affected. Once they attacked, their strength would dissipate even faster, which was extremely disadvantageous to them. Therefore, in this era, the Sage Emperors did not appear. They were peerless existences. As the era changed and the Heaven Tao weakened, the Great Devil Burial Abyss formed by the collapse of the two great regions also changed. The majority of people did not even know of the Great Devil Burial Abyss existence. However, there were still a few experts who knew. Furthermore, there would also be people who would enter in an attempt to obtain opportunities and soar. However, in the past, most of the cultivators who entered the Great Devil Burial Abyss would die in there. There were very few who could come out alive, and those who could obtain opportunities and become even stronger were even rarer. Xia Yongxuan was one of the lucky ones who had obtained a fortuitous encounter, and his strength had clearly increased. But to him, he would rather not have this fortuitous encounter, because obtaining this fortuitous encounter would mean losing his beloved wife. But he had no choice. Hearing everyone's introduction of the Great Devil Burial Abyss, Chu Mu's interest was immediately piqued. The six of them, with Xia Yongxuan leading the way, quickly flew in the direction of the Great Devil Burial Abyss. According to Xia Yongxuan, the Great Devil Burial Abyss was always moving and was not fixed in one place. However, Xia Yongxuan had entered the Great Devil Burial Abyss a few decades ago, and the Great Devil Burial Abyss movement speed was not very fast. Furthermore, it was very large, so if they went in this direction, even if they could not directly find the Great Devil Burial Abyss, they would still be able to trace it. However, from here, it would take at least half a year to reach the Great Devil Burial Abyss with their second refinement flying speed. Fortunately, they had been moving at high speed, so it would not be easy for strong enemies to intercept them. Moreover, the battle above the Sky Mountain of the Sky Mountain region had let many peerless experts see Chu Mu's terrifying strength. It also let them know that the Sky Clan's Sky Kill order was not something they could covet, so they gave up. As for those peerless experts of the triple refinement, they were usually existences with extremely high status in those superpowers. Although they also yearned for the Tian clan's martial way, spirit spells, and heavenly god's secret realm, they were limited by their status, their dignity, and so on. They were not willing to rush about for the rewards of the Tian clan. The third refinement was unwilling to take action, the second refinement was not their opponent, and the first refinement was like an ant. Chu Mu and his group were not intercepted at all. Although the Sky Clan's divine prohibition guards were all mobilized, the deep blue world was very big. It would not be easy for them to find Chu Mu and his group, let alone Chu Mu and his group who were moving at high speed. Chu Mu was different from other experts in one point, and that was that he could multitask. Therefore, even while flying, a part of his mind was used to travel, and the other part was used to comprehend the sword heaven and earth. This true God sword sect's secret manual was broad and profound. Even with Chu Mu's current attainments in the sword way, he was unable to comprehend all of it. He could only comprehend a small part of it. Of course, splitting his mind to comprehend was not as good as comprehending with all his might, but it was better than not comprehending with all his might. The third part of his mind was used on the nurturing of the spiritual sword. Dozens of years ago, he had obtained the sword embryo of the innate spiritual sword from the heavenly ancient sacred palace left behind by the heavenly ancient sacred emperor. It was nurtured in his dantian, and was constantly nourished by the divine desolate sword essence. It should have already taken shape and become a true spiritual sword, but because the innate spiritual sword's sword embryo had astonishing potential and its growth was extremely strong, Chu Mu planned to nurture it into an existence similar to the eternal spiritual sword. Therefore, he suppressed the growth of the innate spiritual sword's sword embryo, and planned to transform it after obtaining the second type of sword intent. Now that the annihilation sword intent was complete and could be used, it was the best time to nurture the spiritual sword. The destructive power of the annihilation sword intent was extremely shocking, far surpassing the eternal sword intent. If the Battle King's avatar's spiritual light was hit by the annihilation sword intent, it would definitely be destroyed, unable to escape. More than 10 days later, the innate spiritual sword's sword embryo finally became a spiritual sword. The moment the spiritual sword was formed, Chu Mu immediately mobilized the power of the annihilation sword intent and injected it into the spiritual sword. Bit by bit, he was afraid that the spiritual sword would be destroyed. Under the annihilation sword intent, the spiritual sword also changed bit by bit. It was a kind of change in nature, a kind of metamorphosis. The complete metamorphosis of the spiritual sword required a period of time, but compared to the metamorphosis of the sword intent, it was much faster. Every day, Chu Mu could feel the changes in the spiritual sword, little by little. Once the spiritual sword had completely transformed into the annihilation spiritual sword, the annihilation sword intent would be amplified, and its power would be even more powerful. Furthermore, he could refine the death sword spirit into the spiritual sword, making it even more powerful and allowing him to comprehend new sword move. He could even combine the two swords, combining the sword spirits of life and death. It would be even more profound. Time flew by. The divine guard of the Celestials searched everywhere for Chu Mu and the others, but they did not know that Chu Mu and the others had already flown in the direction of the great devil burial abyss. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. The injuries to the Battle King's soul had also healed. Chu Mu, you should feel honored that I have to personally take action. With a low roar, the Battle King's body vanished from the hall in an incomprehensible manner. In the next moment, he appeared tens of thousands of meters away from the imperial court. He turned into a streak of light, tearing through the sky as he flew towards the place where his avatar had descended. He did not know where Chu Mu and the others had gone, but as long as he arrived at the place where his avatar had descended, he would be able to sense the fluctuations of auras from Chu Mu and the others. Through their auras, he would be able to chase after Chu Mu and the others, killing them all. Then he would capture Chu Mu alive and interrogate him for various secret techniques. Back then, I kept going forward from here until I finally entered the great devil burial abyss. In the air, the 6 silhouettes stopped. Xia Yongxuan pointed forward as he spoke. The place he was pointing at was filled with darkness. That darkness was like a bottomless abyss. Seems like after so many years, we still haven't left the great devil burial abyss. Feng Wuhan said. Yes, but after so many years, going forward and entering the great devil burial abyss is definitely different from back then. Xia Yongxuan continued, if we can find the place where we entered back then, maybe it would be less dangerous and we would be able to go deeper. Everyone knew that in the great devil burial abyss, the deeper one went, the higher the chances of obtaining good fortune. But at the same time, the deeper one went, the greater the danger one would encounter. Since ancient times, no one had ever been able to come out alive from the depths of the great devil burial abyss, let alone reach the central region. The goal of Chu Mu and the others was not to go deeper into the great devil burial abyss. They only wanted to obtain good fortune and increase their strength. Of course, it would be best if they could raise their strength to the 3rd refinement in the shortest time possible. Chapter 1949. Darkness surrounded them like a dark and desolate domain, greatly affecting their vision. Even though Chu Mu's eyesight was amazing, far better than Feng Wuhan and the others, he could only see 1,000 meters away. Beyond that, it was a blur, and beyond that, it was pitch black. The coldness kept drilling into their bodies. This coldness was not the coldness of the temperature dropping to the extreme, but a kind of gloomy coldness. It was the gloomy coldness formed by the accumulation of countless yin qi after the death of too many creatures. This kind of coldness was more terrible than simple cold. The coldness would only freeze people, but the gloomy coldness would not only coagulate people's blood, it would even affect the body's vitality. After a long time, one's vitality would be depleted, and death qi would spread. Eventually, one would become a living dead, and could only survive in the great demon burial abyss, unable to leave for eternity. Moreover, this kind of gloomy coldness would also affect one's mind, creating illusions, and even causing one to completely lose consciousness. All in all, as soon as they entered the great demon burial abyss, everyone felt an amazing gloomy coldness invading them from all directions, trying to penetrate their bodies and their spiritual world, eroding their qi, blood, bones, organs, and minds. What a terrifying place, Kong Lu muttered in a low voice. His voice was abrupt and soul-stirring in this spacious and quiet place. Even a 9-star saint-level cultivator cannot stay in such a place for a long time. Otherwise, they will definitely be eroded. Chu Mu said. He could clearly feel that the invasion was continuous, like a virus that was trying to infect his body and mind. Even a 9-star saint-level cultivator can only walk in the periphery of the great demon burial abyss, and cannot stay for more than 6 hours. Otherwise, they will lose their consciousness, and their bodies will be eroded by the gloomy coldness, and they will become a wandering corpse, Xia Yongxuan said. Xia Yongxuan said. He had been to the great devil burial abyss before and had a deeper understanding of it than Chu Mu and the others. The so-called wandering corpses were the corpses that wandered around. They were the living dead. There are 4 sources of danger in the great devil burial abyss. Xia Yongxuan said seriously. The first kind is the so-called wandering corpse, which is the lowest level of danger. The second kind is the nether spirit, which is formed after the bodies and primordial spirits of the experts who entered the great devil burial abyss were destroyed and their consciousness was eroded. They are even more terrifying than the wandering corpse. The third kind is the devil spirit, which is even more terrifying. It is formed by the primordial spirits of the experts who died in the ancient times, devouring each other and absorbing endless evil qi. The fourth kind is the other practitioners, whose level is closely related to the strength and ability of the practitioner. Even though the practitioners who entered the Great Devil Burial Abyss were an insignificant portion of the practitioners as a whole, there were still some. Moreover, the practitioners who dared to enter the Great Devil Burial Abyss were either desperate for various reasons and had no choice but to enter. If they couldn't win, they would die in there. If they could win, they would obtain an opportunity and become stronger. Otherwise, they were lunatics who fought to survive and pursued extreme challenges. This kind of person had astonishing perseverance, firm will, incomparably tenacious and unshakable, and acted without scruples. They were very scary. Everyone listened to Xia Yongxuan seriously. At this time, they couldn't relax. In a place like the Great Devil Burial Abyss, no matter how powerful one was, one careless mistake could cost one's life. However, no matter what, the 6 of them had the strength of at least the second refinement. Therefore, they could withstand the erosion of the gloomy coldness very well. An ordinary 9-star saint-level cultivator could resist for 6 hours in the periphery. After 6 hours they would be eroded. If it was a 9-star saint-level cultivator who was more powerful, they would naturally be able to resist the erosion for a longer period of time. A first refinement peerless expert was tens or even hundreds of times stronger than a 9-star saint-level cultivator. Hence, in a place like the periphery, one could basically stay as long as one wanted. Chu Mu and the others had the strength of at least the second refinement. Even if they went deeper, they could still last for a long time. It's here. The warlord descended from the sky. He stretched out his hand as if he had caught something. It was a strand of qi. After carefully sensing the ripples of the first refinement qi, the warlord moved again. He followed the tracks of Chu Mu and the others and came to a valley. He caught another strand of qi and followed it again. When Chu Mu did not use his secret sword will, his strength was at the second refinement. Feng Wuhan and the others were also at the second refinement. However, there were differences in their strength, so there were differences in their speed. However, since they were traveling together, they naturally moved together. Therefore, they maintained the speed of the advanced second refinement. This speed was 100% of the warlord's speed. With their advanced second refinement flying speed, it took them half a year to reach the Great Devil Burial Abyss. The warlord was a third refinement cultivator. Moreover, he was a peerless third refinement cultivator. Although he was not good at speed, his flying speed was still at the advanced third refinement. It was at least 10 times faster than an advanced second refinement cultivator. Chu Mu and the others needed half a year to reach the Great Devil Burial Abyss, but the warlord did not need 10 days. Looking at the darkness in front of them, it was as deep and gloomy as the abyss. Just one look was enough to make one's heart palpitate. Even the warlord, who was at the advanced third refinement, felt the same. Could this be the Great Devil Burial Abyss? The warlord's expression changed drastically. As one of the 10 lords of the imperial court and one of the few advanced third refinement cultivators in the deep blue world, the warlord had lived for a long time and had seen a lot. Naturally, he knew of the Great Devil Burial Abyss. Although he had never entered the Great Devil Burial Abyss, his understanding of it was more detailed than Xia Yongxuan's. It was precisely because he knew more about the great abyss of the Devil Burial Abyss that he knew how terrifying it was. Even if he was a peerless third refinement cultivator, if he wasn't careful, he would still die. That was why Zhan Wang's expression changed drastically, and his heart was filled with dread. Could it be that they have all entered the Great Devil Burial Abyss? The warlord could not help but think. His thoughts turned and he immediately understood. Knowing that they could not fight against the imperial court, they entered the Great Devil Burial Abyss in an attempt to obtain great opportunities to increase their strength before coming back to fight against the imperial court? After understanding this point, the warlord immediately revealed a cold smile. The Great Devil Burial Abyss is extremely terrifying. If it was in the outer region, with your strength as an exceptional second refinement cultivator, you would be able to do whatever you want. However, don't even think about obtaining any great opportunities. If you go deeper, even an exceptional third refinement cultivator would have a high chance of dying. Don't even think about obtaining any opportunities to increase your strength. The deeper one went into the great devil burial abyss, the better the opportunities one could obtain. In the outer region, exceptional second refinement cultivators could do whatever they wanted. However, even if they obtained any opportunities, they would only be ordinary ones. At most, they would be useful for Saint Realm cultivators. It would be difficult for them to obtain first refinement cultivators, let alone second refinement cultivators. No. The warlord frowned as if he was deep in thought. Chu Mu is a monstrous genius and has great luck. Otherwise, he would not have been able to survive until now under the pursuit of the imperial court and the heavenly clan. Moreover, he is constantly getting stronger. If he obtains a great opportunity in the great devil burial abyss, his strength will increase tremendously. At that time, he will be a great threat. With a thought, the warlord's face became resolute. His eyes were as sharp as swords, piercing through the void. He looked at the dark, desolate region in front of him and turned into a ray of light, quickly entering the dark, desolate region. If he wanted to kill Chu Mu, the other 5 were nothing. They were like ants that he could easily crush. Only Chu Mu was the one who made the warlord feel threatened. He had to die. Chu Mu and the others did not know that the warlord's real body had arrived and had already entered the great devil burial abyss. They were about to cross the outer perimeter of the great devil burial abyss. However, they encountered the first type of danger that Xia Yongxuan had mentioned, the wandering corpses. The wandering corpses were wearing tattered robes. Their skin was greenish-black and looked extremely strange. They were as tough as cowhide and their eyes were pale green. When they moved, there was a slight hesitation, but there was a sense of ferocity that made one's heart palpitate. The eyes of these wandering corpses are light green. They are low-level wandering corpses, but you have to be careful. They are transformed from cultivators who have lost their minds and have been tempered by the baleful yin qi for years. Every wandering corpse's body is very strong. Even a saint-level attack would not be able to harm them. Even an attack from a peerless first refinement expert would not be able to cause any obvious damage to them. Moreover, their bodies carry the baleful yin poison. Once you are scratched by them, the baleful yin poison will invade your body. Even a peerless second refinement expert would find it difficult to resist, Xia Yongxuan said. As he spoke, the low-level wandering corpses had already rushed over. Their roars were terrifying and murky liquid flowed out from the corners of their mouths, emitting a strong stench. They were extremely fast and appeared in front of Chu Mu and the others in the blink of an eye, bringing with them a gust of wind. Feng Wuhan drew his sword. His sword was like a breeze that passed through the gaps and disappeared without a trace. It brushed against the wandering corpses' bodies. Immediately, the wandering corpses froze and the claws that were reaching for the group stopped in midair. In the next moment, their bodies were torn into pieces. With Feng Wuhan's second refinement strength, even if he did not use his full strength, it was still easy for him to kill the wandering corpses that were only at the first refinement. There were no treasures to be found on the wandering corpses. After killing them, the group ignored them and continued to move forward, going deeper into the great demon burial abyss. However, the great demon burial abyss was dark and gloomy inside. The evil yin qi was continuous and the evil yin qi was surrounding it. This greatly reduced the group's speed. Zhan Wang had also entered the great demon burial abyss. However, the direction he entered was slightly different from the direction Chu Mu and the others had entered. In the great demon burial abyss, the evil yin qi was surrounding it and the aura was severely disturbed. Under such circumstances, Zhan Wang could only rely on luck if he wanted to catch up with Chu Mu and the others. However, his luck did not seem to be very good. The slight difference in direction and the slight deviation caused the distance between him and Chu Mu and the others to increase.